Tonight, in the heart of London's most ruthless social arena, a widow will do the unthinkable. She will refuse a duke. Not with trembling hands or stammered apologies, but with ice-cold precision. They call her the Countess of Shadows. They whisper she killed her husband. They circle her like wolves waiting for the kill. But when Duke Adrian Vale, the man who has never been denied, extends his hand across that glittering ballroom floor, Elara Whitcombe will look him in the eye and say no. What happens next will ignite a war neither of them expected. A game of power, secrets, and survival that will shake the foundations of London society. Stay until the end to see how she wins. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. Let's see where you're watching from. This is the Countess who refused to kneel. The carriage wheels clattered over rain-slicked cobblestones, each jolt a reminder that London had not softened in her absence. Elara Whitcombe pressed her gloved hand against the window, watching the gas lamps flicker to life along Mayfair's pristine streets. 3 years. 3 years since she'd fled this gilded cage, and now she was returning, not in triumph, but in desperation. "Ma'am, we're nearly there," her lady's maid Margaret said quietly from the opposite seat. The older woman's face was lined with worry, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "I know." Elara's voice was steady, betraying none of the storm raging beneath her composed exterior. She had learned long ago that emotion was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not in this world, not when predators could smell fear like blood in the water. The carriage rounded the corner onto Grosvenor Square, and there it stood, Ashford House, her late husband's London residence. Even in the dying light, its Georgian facade gleamed with cold perfection. Every window dark, every door locked against her for 3 years while the estate lawyers and distant relatives fought over what remained of the Whitcombe fortune. But tonight was different. Tonight, the doors would open. Because Lord Edmund Whitcombe's cousin, Charles, had finally overplayed his hand. He'd pushed too hard, demanded too much, and the courts, reluctant to grant a distant male relative control over a title that still technically belonged to Elara, had granted her temporary access to settle the estate's affairs. Temporary. That was the word that haunted her dreams. She had 6 months to save Ravenscross Manor, the crumbling Yorkshire estate that was her only true home, the only place where Edmund's ghost didn't suffocate her. 6 months to raise enough capital to pay the debts, satisfy the creditors, and prove she could manage the property without male oversight. 6 months, or Charles would seize everything. The carriage stopped. A footman appeared, opening the door and offering his hand. Elara stepped down onto the pavement, her emerald silk gown whispering against the stone. She'd chosen this dress deliberately, rich, elegant, but not ostentatious, the color of money without the vulgarity of excess. She would need every advantage tonight. "Remember," she murmured to Margaret as they climbed the steps, "we are here to observe, not engage. We say nothing of Ravenscross, nothing of the debts. We are simply present." "Yes, ma'am." Margaret's voice trembled slightly. Elara paused at the door, her hand on the brass knocker. Through the tall windows, she could see the glow of 1,000 candles, hear the distant swell of an orchestra, the murmur of London's elite gathering for the season's most prestigious event, the Ashford Ball. Her ball. Or it had been once, when Edmund was alive and she'd been the perfect countess, silent, obedient, ornamental. She lifted the knocker and let it fall. The doors swung open, and Elara stepped into a wall of heat, light, and noise. The grand entrance hall of Ashford House blazed with crystal chandeliers, their light reflecting off polished marble and gilded mirrors. Guests milled about in a riot of silk and jewels, their laughter sharp and performative. Every head turned. The music didn't stop. The orchestra was too well trained for that. But the conversations did. One by one, voices died as society's finest registered her presence. The Countess Whitcombe, the widow who'd vanished, the woman surrounded by whispers too scandalous to speak aloud but too delicious to ignore. "She killed him, you know. Found him at the bottom of the stairs," they say. No tears at the funeral. What kind of woman doesn't cry for her husband? Elara heard none of it aloud, but she felt it in every stare, every half-hidden smirk, every subtle shift as the crowd parted before her like water around a stone. She moved forward with her head high, her expression serene, her heart a block of ice in her chest. Margaret fell back, disappearing into the servants' passages as planned. Elara walked alone. A few acquaintances nodded, distant, polite, utterly insincere. Lady Hartwell, who'd once called her dear friend, turned her back entirely. Lord Pemberton, Edmund's old hunting companion, studied her with open suspicion, and then she saw him. Duke Adrian Vale stood at the far end of the ballroom, one shoulder against a marble column, a glass of champagne dangling carelessly from his fingers. He wasn't watching her, not directly, but she felt his attention like a weight, like the moment before lightning strikes. Adrian Vale, the unmarried duke, the man who'd built a shipping empire from nothing, who moved through Parliament like a knife through silk, who took what he wanted and apologized to no one. He was tall, dark-haired, with the kind of angular features that should have been too harsh to be handsome, but somehow weren't. His eyes were gray. Not warm gray, but the color of winter seas. Dangerous eyes. He'd been at Edmund's funeral. She remembered because he was the only person who hadn't offered meaningless condolences. He'd simply looked at her, nodded once, and left. Now he was looking at her again. "Elara Whitcombe," a voice purred beside her. "How unexpected." She turned. Lady Constance Fairfax stood there, resplendent in midnight blue, her smile all teeth and venom. Constance had been Edmund's lover for the last 2 years of his life. Not that Elara had cared by then. She'd been grateful for anything that kept her husband out of her bed. "Lady Fairfax," Elara replied coolly, "how persistent of you to still use these rooms." Constance's smile sharpened. "Oh, darling, I'm here as a guest." Charles extended the invitation. He's quite the gracious host now that he's managing the estate. There it was. The first strike. Charles was already acting as if he owned Ashford House, already positioning himself as the rightful heir. "How generous of my late husband's cousin," Elara said smoothly, "though I wasn't aware the courts had finalized the succession." "A matter of time, surely." Constance's eyes glittered. "After all, what does a woman need with a London house? You're much better suited to smaller concerns." Translation: know your place. Elara smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. "Perhaps, though I've always found that underestimation is a gift. It allows one to work unobserved." Before Constance could respond, a ripple of movement drew their attention. The crowd was parting again, but this time not for Elara. Duke Adrian Vale was walking toward them. No, not toward them. Toward her. Every eye in the ballroom tracked his progress. Women straightened, men stiffened, and Constance actually took a half step back. Adrian Vale in motion was like watching a predator cross the savannah, elegant, inevitable, utterly focused. He stopped directly in front of Elara, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. Up close, he was even more imposing, broad-shouldered, impeccably dressed in black evening wear, with an aura of controlled power that made the air feel heavier. "Countess Whitcombe," he said. His voice was deep, cultured, with an edge that suggested he could pivot from charm to menace without changing his tone. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Neither did half of London, it seems," she replied evenly. His mouth curved, not quite a smile. "May I have this dance?" The ballroom went utterly silent. It wasn't a casual invitation. When the Duke of Vale asked a woman to dance, it meant something. It signaled interest, intent. It marked her as someone worthy of his attention, someone he was considering pursuing or destroying. Elara felt the weight of 100 stares, felt Constance's fury radiating beside her, felt the trap closing around her because refusing a duke was social suicide, and accepting meant stepping into a game she didn't understand. She looked up into those winter-gray eyes and made her choice. "No thank you, Your Grace." The silence shattered into chaos. For 3 full seconds, no one moved. No one breathed. Then Adrian Vale did something Elara didn't expect. He laughed. Not loud, just a low, genuine sound of surprise. "No?" "No." Elara kept her voice light, pleasant, as if she'd just declined an offer of tea. "I've only just arrived, and I'm afraid I'm not yet prepared for the dance floor. Perhaps another time." It was a masterclass in polite refusal. She'd given him an out, a graceful way to retreat without either of them losing face. Any other man would have taken it. Adrian Vale was not any other man. How unfortunate, he said, still watching her with that unnerving focus. I rarely extend invitations twice. Then I imagine you're rarely refused the first time. Something flickered in his eyes. Amusement, perhaps, or irritation. Possibly both. You're not what I expected, Countess. I'm so rarely what anyone expects, Your Grace. He studied her for a moment longer, then inclined his head. Not a bow, just an acknowledgement. Enjoy your evening, then. He turned and walked away, and the crowd exhaled collectively. Constance stared at her as if she'd just stabbed someone in public. Are you insane? Possibly, Elara murmured, watching Adrian's retreating back. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them against her skirts to hide it. Excuse me, Constance, I need air. She moved toward the terrace doors before anyone else could intercept her. The cool night air hit her face like a blessing, and she stepped out onto the stone balcony overlooking the gardens. Alone at last, she allowed herself one deep breath, then another. What had she just done? She'd refused the Duke of Vale in front of the entire social elite. She'd made herself memorable, which was exactly what she couldn't afford. She needed to be invisible, unremarkable, forgotten while she quietly worked to save Ravencross. Instead, she just painted a target on her back. Bold move! Elara spun. A woman stood in the shadows near the balustrade, mid-30s, auburn-haired, dressed in a gown of deep crimson that suggested wealth but not aristocracy. Her smile was knowing. I'm sorry, Elara said carefully. Have we met? No, but I know who you are. The woman stepped forward, extending her hand. Vivian Cross. I run a consultancy of sorts. Investment advice, property management, that sort of thing. Elara shook her hand cautiously. Investment advice. In other words, the kind of business respectable women weren't supposed to engage in. I'm not sure I require... You need £20,000 in 6 months or Charles Whitcombe seizes Ravencross Manor, Vivian interrupted calmly. You have approximately 4,000 in liquid assets, no marketable skills that society recognizes, and every creditor in Yorkshire circling like sharks. Am I incorrect? Elara's blood ran cold. How do you know that? It's my business to know things. Vivian leaned against the balustrade, utterly relaxed. It's also my business to help women who find themselves in difficult positions. Women who can't access capital through traditional means because those means require a husband, a father, or a brother to co-sign. And what do you want in return? 20% of whatever you save, and an introduction to 3 other women in similar circumstances. Vivian's smile sharpened. I don't work for charity, Countess, but I also don't work for men, which means when I help you, your success is mine. No hidden agendas, no sudden reversals when you become inconvenient. It was tempting, dangerously tempting. I'll consider it, Elara said finally. Do that. Vivian produced a card from somewhere in her gown and pressed it into Elara's hand. But don't take too long. Charles is already moving pieces on the board. He's got a solicitor drafting papers to claim mismanagement. One scandal, just one, and the courts will hand him everything. What kind of scandal? Vivian's expression turned pitying. You're a beautiful widow with a suspicious husband's death and no male protection. There are a dozen scandals waiting to be manufactured. All it takes is one rumor, one witness, one well-placed lie. She left without another word, disappearing back into the ballroom like smoke. Elara stood alone, Vivian's card clutched in her hand, staring out at the manicured gardens. The truth settled over her like a shroud. She wasn't safe here. She'd never been safe here. And refusing Adrian Vale hadn't made her invisible. It had made her prey. Adrian Vale did not return to the ballroom immediately. Instead, he found himself in the library. Edmund Whitcombe's library. Now, technically, Charles Whitcombe's, though Adrian suspected the man had never opened a book in his life. He poured himself a brandy and settled into a leather chair, replaying the last 10 minutes in his mind. She'd refused him. It shouldn't matter. Women were easy to acquire when one had wealth, title, and power. They threw themselves at him at every social function, each one more transparent than the last. Beautiful, boring, interchangeable. Elara Whitcombe was none of those things. He'd first noticed her at Edmund's funeral, not for her beauty, though she was striking, but for her control. She'd stood at the graveside like a statue carved from marble, dry-eyed and silent, while Edmund's relatives wept theatrical tears. Everyone else had whispered about her coldness. Adrian had recognized it for what it was: survival. He'd made inquiries afterward, discreet ones. What he'd learned had been interesting. Elara had married Edmund Whitcombe at 18, fresh from a minor gentry family with more breeding than money. The marriage had been arranged, her father's debts in exchange for a title and security. For the first year, she'd played her role perfectly: the dutiful wife, the gracious hostess, the ornamental countess. Then something had changed. Edmund had grown volatile, unpredictable. There were rumors, never substantiated, of violence behind closed doors. Servants who left suddenly. Doctors called in the middle of the night. And Elara had stopped appearing in public, stopped hosting, stopped being the perfect society wife. Until Edmund fell down the stairs and broke his neck. The official story was an accident: too much to drink, a missed step, a tragic end to a troubled man. The unofficial story, well, London loved an unofficial story, but Adrian didn't deal in rumors. He dealt in facts. Fact: Elara had been the only person in the house when Edmund died. Fact: she'd inherited nothing except the Yorkshire estate, which was drowning in debt. Fact: she'd fled London the day after the funeral and hadn't returned until tonight. Fact: she'd just refused him in a room full of people who would dissect that refusal for weeks. Why? Most women in her position would have leapt at the chance to dance with a duke. The protection it offered, the alliances it suggested. She needed those things desperately. Yet she'd looked at him with those calm green eyes and said no, as if she had all the power in the world. It was, Adrian admitted to himself, the most interesting thing a woman had done in his presence in years. The library door opened. Adrian didn't turn, recognizing the heavy footfalls. Vale. Charles Whitcombe's voice was jovial, lubricated by too much champagne. Didn't expect to find you hiding in here. I'm not hiding, I'm thinking. Charles laughed, dropping into the chair opposite. He was a florid man in his 40s, all bluster and entitlement. About my dear cousin's widow, I'd wager. Saw you get rejected. Brutal, that. Adrian sipped his brandy. She's grieving. It's understandable. Grieving? Charles snorted. She's calculating. Always has been. Married Edmund for his money and title, then probably pushed him down those stairs when he became inconvenient. You have proof of that? Don't need proof. Everyone knows it. Everyone knows rumors, Adrian corrected mildly. There's a difference. Charles leaned forward, his expression turning sly. You interested in her? Because I could arrange an introduction. Properly, I mean. Not like this evening's debacle. Why would you do that? Because, Your Grace, I'm a pragmatist. But Charles spread his hands. I want Ashford House and Ravencross Manor. Elara wants to keep Ravencross. If she were to remarry, say, to a wealthy duke, she'd have the capital to pay off the debts and keep the estate. I'd get this house without a protracted legal battle. Everyone wins. Except Elara, Adrian thought. Who would trade one cage for another? I'll consider it, he said neutrally. Charles grinned. Excellent, though I should warn you, she's not an easy woman. Edmund used to say she had ice water in her veins. No passion, no warmth. Beautiful to look at, but cold as December in bed. Adrian set down his glass very carefully. Edmund said that? Oh, constantly. Complained about it to anyone who'd listen. Charles seemed oblivious to the danger in Adrian's tone. Couldn't get an air off her, couldn't even get her to smile. Between you and me, I think that's why he took up with Constance Fairfax. A man has needs, after all. Indeed. Adrian stood, brushing invisible lint from his jacket. Thank you for the insight, Whitcombe. Most illuminating. He left before Charles could respond, his mind churning. Edmund Whitcombe had publicly humiliated his wife by discussing their intimate life, or lack thereof, with other men. He'd driven her into isolation, then blamed her for his own failings. And when she'd finally escaped, Adrian had spent the last decade building an empire. He understood leverage, understood power dynamics, understood how to identify an opponent's weaknesses and exploit them. He also understood when he was looking at someone who'd been systematically destroyed. And Elara Whitcombe, for all her composure, bore the marks of a woman who'd learned to survive by becoming invisible. Except tonight, she hadn't been invisible. Tonight, she'd challenged him. Adrian found himself smiling as he descended the stairs. She thought she'd made herself a problem by refusing him. She had no idea she'd made herself infinitely more interesting. He would give her time, spay, let her think she'd escaped his notice. And then he would move. Elara remained on the terrace for another 20 minutes, composing herself before returning to the ballroom. When she did, she moved through the crowd like a ghost, present but unremarked upon, exactly as she preferred. She noted the clusters of gossip, the sidelong glances, the way conversation stopped when she passed. Let them talk. She'd endured worse. At precisely 11 o'clock, she signaled Margaret and made for the exit. No farewells, no lingering. She'd done what she came to do, shown her face, established her presence, reminded London she still existed. The carriage ride back to the modest townhouse she'd rented in Bloomsbury was silent. Margaret dozed in the corner while Elara stared out the window, her mind cataloging everything she'd learned. Charles was already positioning himself as the estate's master. Constance was allied with him. Vivian Cross knew too much. And Adrian Vale. She didn't know what to make of Adrian Vale. The townhouse was dark when they arrived. Elara dismissed Margaret and climbed the stairs to her small study, where she kept the estate ledgers and correspondence. She lit a single lamp and opened the most recent letter from her solicitor in Yorkshire. The news was worse than she'd expected. 3 tenants had left Ravencross in the past month, unable to pay rent on land that was increasingly unproductive. The roof of the west wing was leaking. The sheep had contracted some kind of illness, decimating the flock. And the largest creditor, a London banker named Thorne, was threatening legal action if he didn't receive payment by summer's end. £20,000. She needed £20,000. She had £4,000. Elara pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and began calculating. If she sold the few pieces of jewelry she'd kept, perhaps another 1,000. If she took Vivian Cross's offer and somehow secured investment capital, maybe 5,000 more if she was extraordinarily lucky and persuasive. That left her 10,000 short. £10,000 she had no way of obtaining, unless she remarried. The thought made her stomach turn. She'd rather lose Ravencross than chain herself to another man, another Edmund, another lifetime of being property instead of person. But what if he wasn't another Edmund? She thought of Adrian Vale's gray eyes, his quiet confidence, the way he'd laughed when she refused him. He was dangerous. She knew that instinctively. But was he cruel? She didn't know, and she couldn't afford to find out the hard way. A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. Margaret appeared, looking apologetic. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but there's a gentleman here. He says it's urgent." "At this hour? Who is it?" "He says his name is Thorne." Elara's blood ran cold. The creditor. Here. Now. She stood, smoothing her skirts. "Show him to the drawing room. I'll be down directly." "Ma'am, should I—" "It's fine, Margaret. Go to bed. I'll handle this." Margaret hesitated, then curtsied and withdrew. Elara took a moment to steady her breathing, then descended the stairs. The drawing room was small but elegant, furnished with pieces she'd salvaged from Ravencross. A man stood by the fireplace, tall, thin, with the sharp features of someone who counted pennies and found people wanting. He turned as she entered. "Countess Whitcombe." His smile was like a knife. "How kind of you to receive me at such a late hour." "Mr. Thorne?" Elara didn't sit, didn't offer him a seat. "I wasn't aware we had an appointment." "We don't, but I was in the neighborhood after the Ashford ball, and I thought, why not call on my favorite debtor?" "I'm not in default, Mr. Thorne. The payment isn't due until August." "True, but I've recently received some concerning information about the estate's condition." He pulled out a folded document, extending it toward her. 3 lost tenants, a dying flock, structural damage. It makes a creditor nervous, you understand. Elara took the document, her mind racing. This was too detailed, too current. Someone had been reporting to Thorne. Someone with access to Ravencross. Charles. "The estate is being managed," she said evenly. "These are temporary setbacks." "Are they?" Thorne cocked his head. "Because from where I stand, it looks like a woman attempting to run a property she has neither the skill nor the resources to maintain. It looks like a bad investment." Then perhaps you should have considered that before extending the loan. Oh, I didn't extend the loan to you, Countess. I extended it to your late husband when he was gambling away his inheritance. Thorne's smile widened. I'm simply here to collect what I'm owed. And if you can't pay, well, the courts are very understanding about the necessity of male oversight in these matters. There it was, the real threat. He wasn't here to collect debt. He was here to force her into a corner where she'd have to accept Charles's control, or worse, sell Ravencross to Thorne himself at a fraction of its value. Elara met his gaze steadily. I'll have your payment by August, Mr. Thorne, every penny. Will you? Because I've done some calculations, and unless you've got a secret gold mine hidden in Yorkshire, I don't see how that's possible. Then I suppose you'll be pleasantly surprised. Thorne studied her for a long moment, then chuckled. You know what I like about you, Countess? You've got spine. Most women would be weeping by now, begging for mercy. He moved toward the door, then paused. But spine doesn't pay debts. Remember that. He left without another word. Elara stood perfectly still until she heard the front door close, then allowed herself to sink into a chair. Her hands were trembling again, not with fear, but with fury. They thought they could break her. Charles, Thorne, all of them. They thought she was just another helpless widow, another piece to be moved around their chessboard. They had no idea what she'd survived to get this far, and she'd be damned if she let them take Ravencross without a fight. She reached for Vivienne Cross's card, still tucked in her glove. Tomorrow, she would pay Miss Cross a visit. Tonight she would plan. Morning came too early and too bright. Elara sat in Vivienne Cross's office, a discreet townhouse in Belgravia that looked like a private residence from the outside but was clearly all business within. The office itself was remarkable. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a massive oak desk covered in ledgers and correspondence, and maps of England pinned to the walls with various properties marked in colored ink. This was not the domain of a society lady dabbling in charity. This was a war room. Vivienne sat across from her, reading the documents Elara had brought with the focused intensity of a general studying battlefield reports. 20,000, she said finally, setting down the papers. And you have 4 in liquid assets. Yes. Ravencross has good bones. The land is fertile, the location is strategic, the house itself could be magnificent with proper investment, but the debt is strangling it. I'm aware. Vivienne leaned back, steepling her fingers. I can get you 10,000 through a consortium of private investors, women, mostly, who've made money in ways society doesn't acknowledge and want to diversify. They'll take 20% equity in Ravencross as collateral. That still leaves me 6,000 short. It does. Which brings us to option 2. You marry someone wealthy enough to cover the remaining debt. Elara's jaw tightened. No. I thought you might say that. Vivienne's smile was grim. So let's discuss option 3. You generate the remaining capital yourself. How? Ravencross has assets you're not leveraging. The sheep flock is sick, yes, but the land can support other industries. There's a coal seam on the eastern boundary that Edmund never exploited because he thought it beneath him. There are outbuildings that could be converted to workshops for textile production. You have water access via the River Nid. You could establish a mill. Elara felt a flicker of hope. That would require initial investment, which the consortium can provide. But here's the catch, Countess. You can't do this from London. You need to be in Yorkshire, on the ground, managing the operations directly, which means leaving London during the season, abandoning any pretense of society. Precisely. And that means Charles will use your absence to paint you as an irresponsible absentee landlord. He'll claim you've abandoned your duties, that you're unfit for oversight. Elara stood pacing to the window. Outside, London bustled with its usual chaos, carriages, street vendors, the endless churn of the city. She'd thought coming back here would give her leverage, would force society to acknowledge her claim to the estate. Instead, she'd walked into a trap. What would you do? She asked quietly. Vivienne joined her at the window. I'd go to Yorkshire. I'd work like hell for 6 months. And I'd build something so undeniably successful that when Charles challenged me in court, the judge would laugh him out of chambers. And if I fail, then you'll fail having tried, which is better than succeeding at being someone else's decoration. Elara turned to face her. You speak from experience. I do. My husband tried to have me committed to an asylum when I wanted to manage my own inheritance. Said I was hysterical, unstable, unfit. Vivian's expression hardened. I divorced him, took my money, and built this. Every woman I help is revenge against every man who told me I couldn't. There was a long silence. Then Elara extended her hand. I'll take the consortium's investment, 20% equity, and I'll go to Yorkshire. Vivian shook firmly. Then let's draw up the contracts. You'll want to leave within the week before Charles realizes what you're planning and tries to stop you. He already knows I'm a threat. Tonight proved that. Tonight proved you're willing to fight. There's a difference. Vivian returned to her desk, pulling out fresh documents. One more thing, Countess. The Duke of Vale. Elara stiffened. What about him? He's been asking questions about you. Discreet inquiries through his solicitor about the Whitcombe estate, your financial situation, your late husband's death. Why, I don't know. But Adrian Vale doesn't do anything without purpose. He's either planning to help you or destroy you, and I can't tell which. Vivian met her gaze. Be careful. He's not like other men in your circle. He plays longer games. Elara thought of those gray eyes, that quiet amusement when she'd refused him. Noted. They spent the next 3 hours drafting contracts, reviewing investment proposals, and mapping out a timeline for Ravencross's resurrection. By the time Elara left Vivian's office, she had a plan, a partnership, and a deadline. She also had a growing sense that she'd just set something in motion she couldn't control. Adrian received the report from his investigator that evening. He read it twice, then set it aside and poured himself a drink. Elara Whitcombe had met with Vivian Cross. They'd signed contracts. She was planning to leave London for Yorkshire within days. Interesting. Most women in her position would have stayed in London, would have fought the social battle, would have tried to secure a wealthy husband to solve their problems. Elara was doing the opposite. She was walking away from the chessboard entirely, unless she wasn't walking away, unless she was making a different kind of move. Adrian had built his empire on calculated risks. He'd learned early that the best investments weren't the safest ones. They were the ones everyone else was too timid to make. And right now, London society was abandoning Elara Whitcombe as a lost cause, which meant she was undervalued. He made his decision quickly, as he always did once he'd analyzed the variables. The next morning, he paid a visit to Thorne. The banker received him in a cramped office that smelled of cigars and desperation. Thorne was all smiles and false deference, offering refreshments and flattery that Adrian ignored. I'll keep this brief, Adrian said, settling into a chair. You hold a note on the Ravencross estate, £20,000, due in August. Thorne's smile faltered. Yes, Your Grace, though I'm not sure how that concerns. I'm buying it. The note, the debt, all of it. I'll pay you $25,000, $5,000 premium for your trouble. Thorne's mouth opened, then closed. Your Grace, I'm flattered, but that debt is, well, it's unlikely to be repaid. The estate is failing. The widow is incompetent. I was planning to foreclose and acquire the property at auction, which would take months and yield you perhaps $15,000 if you're lucky. I'm offering $25,000 now, today. Adrian pulled out a bank draft already filled out and set it on the desk. Do we have an agreement? Thorne stared at the draft. £25,000. More than he'd ever get from Elara, more than the property was worth in its current state. May I ask why, Your Grace? You may not. Thorne hesitated only a moment longer, then reached for the draft. Agreement accepted. They signed the paperwork within the hour. By noon, Adrian held the deed to Elara Whitcombe's debt. He returned to his study and wrote her a letter. Countess Whitcombe, I have recently acquired certain financial instruments related to the Ravencross estate. I believe a conversation about our mutual interests would be beneficial. I will call on you tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Regards, Adrian Vale. He sealed it, sent it by courier, and settled back to wait. Tomorrow would be illuminating. Either Elara Whitcombe would panic and offer him whatever he wanted to avoid foreclosure, or she would do something unexpected. Adrian was betting on unexpected. Elara read the letter 3 times, her mind racing. He'd bought her debt. Adrian Vale now held the power to destroy her with a single word. Why? Margaret hovered anxiously. Ma'am, what should I do? Should I prepare tea? Tea, yes, and ask Mrs. Crowley to prepare the drawing room. Nothing extravagant. Elara's voice was steady, but her thoughts were in chaos. Then leave us. I'll receive him alone. Ma'am, that's not… I know. Do it anyway. At precisely 2 o'clock, the Duke of Vale arrived. Elara watched from the upstairs window as he stepped from his carriage, tall, commanding, utterly at ease in his power. She met him in the drawing room, standing as he entered. He dressed simply by ducal standards, dark coat, understated cravat, no unnecessary adornment. But there was nothing simple about the way he occupied space, the way his mere presence made the room feel smaller. "Your Grace," she said, offering a shallow curtsy. "Please sit." He did, choosing the chair opposite hers with the careful deliberation of a chess player selecting his opening move. "Thank you for receiving me, Countess. I'm not sure I had a choice." "You always have a choice." He leaned back, studying her. "That's what makes this interesting." Elara poured tea with steady hands, then settled back into her chair. "You bought my debt." "I did." "Why?" "Because Thorne was going to use it to destroy you, and I dislike waste." "And you? What will you use it for?" Adrian accepted the tea she offered, took a sip, then set it aside. "That depends on you, Countess. I'm a businessman. I invest in assets with growth potential. Ravencross is an asset. The question is whether you are." "I see." Elara's jaw tightened. "So this is a negotiation." "Everything is a negotiation." "And what are your terms?" He smiled, a real smile this time, not the calculated ones she'd seen at the ball. "I have a proposition. I'll forgive the entire debt, all 20,000 pounds. You keep Ravencross free and clear." Elara's heart stopped. "In exchange for what?" "Marry me." The room tilted. Elara stared at him, unable to process what she'd just heard. Marry him. The Duke of Vale, a man she'd met twice, a man who held her entire future in his hands, was proposing marriage as a business transaction. "I don't understand," she said finally. "It's quite simple. I need a wife. Someone intelligent, composed, capable of managing social and political functions without constant supervision. You need capital and protection from men like Charles and Thorne. We both get what we want." "And the debt?" "Dissolved. Ravencross becomes your property outright, managed however you see fit. I won't interfere." It was too good to be true. There had to be a catch. "What do you get out of this?" she asked slowly. "A duchess. A partner who understands discretion. And," he paused, his gray eyes holding hers, "someone who isn't afraid of me." "I am afraid of you." "No, you're not. You're wary. There's a difference." He leaned forward. "Most women either fawn over me or fear me. You looked me in the eye and said no. That's rare, Countess. Rare enough to be valuable." Elara's mind raced. This was insane. She barely knew this man. He could be worse than Edmund, crueler, more controlling. But he could also be her salvation. "I need time to think," she said. "You have until tomorrow morning. After that, the offer expires and I'll collect the debt through traditional means." He stood, brushing invisible dust from his coat. "One more thing, Countess. If you accept, this will be a partnership, not a cage. I don't want a decoration or an ornament. I want someone who can think, act, and fight when necessary. If that's not you, decline now." He walked to the door, then paused. "You refused to dance with me because you thought it would trap you. But you're already trapped, Elara. The question is whether you want to be trapped alone or with someone who might actually be useful." Then he was gone. Elara sat in the silent drawing room for a long time, staring at nothing. Everything she'd planned, the consortium, the Yorkshire work, the slow rebuilding, it all evaporated if she said yes to Adrian Vale. She'd be trading her independence for security, her freedom for protection. But would she? He'd said partnership, not ownership. He'd promised she could manage Ravencross as she saw fit. Could she trust that? Could she afford not to? The letter from her Yorkshire steward lay on the side table. She picked it up, rereading the desperate words. "The tenants are leaving, my lady. Without immediate relief, we'll lose everything by autumn." Autumn, 6 months away. She thought of Vivienne Cross's words. "Spine doesn't pay debts." She thought of Adrian Vale's eyes. "You're already trapped." And she thought of Edmund, 3 years dead, still controlling her life through the debts he'd left behind. When Margaret knocked softly at the door an hour later, Elara had made her decision. "Prepare my writing desk," she said quietly. "I need to send a letter." Margaret's eyes widened. "Ma'am?" "And pack my things. We're not going to Yorkshire." "Where are we going?" Elara stood, smoothing her skirts, feeling the weight of what she was about to do settle over her shoulders like armor. "I'm getting married." The letter went out by courier at dawn. Elara didn't sleep that night, couldn't sleep, knowing what she'd set in motion. By the time weak sunlight filtered through the curtains of her rented townhouse, she'd already bathed, dressed, and steeled herself for what came next. Adrian's response arrived within 2 hours. A simple note instructing her to meet him at his solicitor's office at noon. No flourishes, no sentiment, just coordinates and a time. Margaret fretted as she helped Elara into a deep blue day dress, her hands shaking as she fastened the buttons. "Ma'am, are you certain about this?" "The Duke. He's not like other men. People say he's ruthless, that he destroys anyone who crosses him." "I know what people say." Elara met her own eyes in the mirror. She looked calm, composed, the mask she'd perfected during her years with Edmund. "But I also know what happens if I don't do this. Charles will take Ravencross. Thorne will auction off everything my family built, and I'll spend the rest of my life as a cautionary tale about women who tried to stand alone." "But marriage, ma'am, is a contract, like any other." Elara turned from the mirror, squaring her shoulders. "The question is whether the terms are favorable." She arrived at the solicitor's office 15 minutes early, determined not to appear desperate. The building was elegant but understated, tucked away on a quiet street in Mayfair where London's wealthiest conducted business they preferred to keep discreet. Adrian was already there. He stood as she entered the conference room, his expression unreadable. Today he wore charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, with a silver waistcoat that caught the light. Everything about him projected control, from the way he held himself to the careful placement of documents on the mahogany table. "Countess," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite him. "Thank you for coming." "Your Grace?" She sat, folding her hands in her lap to hide their trembling. "I've considered your proposal." "And?" "I have conditions." His eyebrows rose fractionally. Surprise, or perhaps amusement. "I'm listening." Elara pulled a folded paper from her reticule, smoothing it on the table between them. She'd spent half the night writing this list, crossing out and rewriting until the words were exactly right. "First, Ravencross remains mine, completely. The title, the land, the management, all of it. You will have no legal claim to it, and I will have sole authority over all decisions regarding the estate." "Agreed." She blinked. She'd expected negotiation, pushback. Instead, he'd simply accepted. It made her more nervous, not less. "Second," she continued, her voice steadier now, "this marriage will be one of mutual benefit, not ownership. I won't be your property. I won't be controlled, monitored, or confined. I will maintain my independence in all matters that don't directly conflict with your political or business interests." Adrian leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Define independence." "I choose my own friends, my own pursuits, my own schedule. I won't ask permission to leave the house or account for every hour of my day. I won't be paraded at social functions like a prize mare unless there's a genuine strategic reason for my presence. And in return, I'll fulfill the role of Duchess when required. I'll manage your household, attend necessary functions, support your political endeavors. I'll be competent, discreet, and, when it matters, convincing." He was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes never leaving her face. Then he reached across the table and took her list, scanning it with the focused attention of someone reading a business contract, which, she supposed, was exactly what this was. "Your third condition?" he prompted. Elara took a breath. This was the hardest one, the one that made her feel most vulnerable. "No children. Not for at least 2 years. I need time to stabilize Ravencross, to prove I can manage it, before that becomes a consideration." Something flickered in his expression. Disappointment? Relief? She couldn't read it. "That's not a permanent refusal?" he asked carefully. "No, just a delay. 2 years." Adrian set down the paper, then pulled out his own document. A marriage contract already drafted, already detailed. He slid it across to her. Read this. Everything you've requested is already included, plus a few additions of my own. Elara picked up the contract, her heart pounding. The language was precise, legal, binding. Ravencross would remain her sole property, held in trust separate from the ducal estate. She would receive an annual allowance of £5,000 for personal use. She would have her own household accounts, her own staff, her own wing of whatever residence they occupied. And there, in Clause 7, was a provision she hadn't expected. The Duchess shall be entitled to dissolve this union after 5 years without financial penalty, retaining all properties and allowances granted herein. She looked up sharply. This gives me an exit. It does. Adrian's expression was neutral. I don't want a wife who stays out of obligation or fear. If, after 5 years, you find this arrangement intolerable, you can leave with everything I've promised you. No scandal, no public humiliation, just a quiet legal separation. It was the most generous marriage contract Elara had ever seen. Suspiciously generous. Why? She asked. Why offer me all this? Adrian leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his gaze intense. Because I've watched too many men destroy valuable assets through mismanagement and ego. Your late husband was one of them. He had a brilliant wife, educated, capable, strategic, and he wasted her. Worse than wasted. He tried to break her. Elara's throat tightened. I'm not Edmund Whitcombe, Adrian continued, his voice quiet but firm. I don't collect possessions. I build alliances. And you, Countess, are the kind of ally I want. Someone who thinks. Someone who fights. Someone who looked at impossible odds and chose to survive rather than surrender. You're gambling on me. I am, but I'm very good at calculating risk. He pulled out a pen, dipped it in ink, and signed his name at the bottom of the contract. Then he slid it back to her. The question is whether you're willing to gamble on me. Elara stared at the contract, at his signature, bold and definitive, at the clauses that promised her more freedom than she'd ever had in her life, at the possibility that this could be the cage Edmund's had been, just painted prettier. But there was another possibility, one she barely dared consider. What if Adrian Vale meant every word? She picked up the pen. Her hand hovered over the paper for 3 heartbeats. Then she signed. Witnessed, said a voice from the doorway. Elara turned to find Adrian's solicitor entering, an older man with sharp eyes and an expression of profound satisfaction. Congratulations, Your Grace, and to you, Your Grace. He nodded to Elara. The duchy has a duchess at last. It felt surreal. Elara had just signed away her name, her identity, her entire future, and yet she felt lighter than she had in years. The wedding will be next week, Adrian said, standing. Private ceremony, immediate family only. I've already secured a special license, unless you'd prefer something more elaborate. Private is fine. Better than fine. The thought of standing in front of London society, of enduring their speculation and judgment while she pledged herself to another husband, made her stomach turn. Adrian extended his hand. She took it, and he helped her to her feet, a gesture of courtesy, not control. His grip was firm, but not crushing. One more thing, he said, still holding her hand. I know you don't trust me yet. That's wise. But I need you to understand something. When I commit to a venture, I commit completely. This marriage is now my investment, which means your success is my success. Your enemies are my enemies. And anyone who tries to destroy you will have to go through me first. He released her hand and stepped back, his expression businesslike once more. My carriage will collect you tomorrow morning at 9. We have a great deal of work to do before the wedding, and even more after. I hope you're prepared. For what? His smile was sharp as a blade. War, Countess. We're about to go to war. The news of their engagement broke like a thunderclap over London society. By evening, every drawing room in Mayfair was buzzing with speculation, shock, and in some circles, outright fury. Elara heard about it secondhand from Vivian Cross, who appeared at her townhouse just before dinner with a bottle of expensive wine and a gleeful expression. You magnificent creature, Vivian said, sweeping into the drawing room and pouring them both generous glasses. The Duke of Vale. I knew he was interested, but I didn't expect this. Elara accepted the wine, taking a larger sip than was strictly proper. I didn't either. Charles Whitcombe is apoplectic. He was at his club this afternoon, apparently shouting that you'd seduced the Duke, that you'd manipulated him, that it was all some elaborate scheme to steal the estate. Let him shout. He can't touch me now. No, he can't, but he'll try. Vivian's expression turned serious. Men like Charles don't accept defeat gracefully. He thought he had you cornered. Now you've not only escaped, you've ascended. He'll want revenge. Then he'll be disappointed. Elara set down her glass. Tell me about the consortium. Are they still willing to invest in Ravencross? Even more so now that you're marrying Vale. His reputation lends you credibility. Vivian pulled out a folder of documents. I've drafted a proposal for the coal seam development and the textile mill. With Vale's connections, we can secure better contracts, better prices, better everything. Ravencross won't just survive. It'll thrive. They spent the next hour strategizing, planning, calculating returns. This was what Elara understood: numbers, logistics, concrete problems with concrete solutions. Marriage to Adrian was a variable she couldn't control. But Ravencross? That she could fix. By the time Vivian left, Elara felt centered again, focused. She retired to her study and began drafting letters to her Yorkshire steward, outlining the new plans, the investments, the timeline for implementation. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't hear Margaret enter until the maid cleared her throat softly. Ma'am, there's a visitor, Lady Constance Fairfax. Elara's pen stilled. Constance, Edmund's former mistress, the woman who'd allied herself with Charles. It's quite late for a social call, Elara said carefully. Yes, ma'am. She says it's urgent. Against her better judgment, Elara agreed. Constance swept into the study moments later, still dressed in an elaborate evening gown of gold silk, her face flushed with what looked like anger or wine. Possibly both. Countess, she said, the title dripping with venom. Or should I say, future Duchess? How quickly you've moved on from mourning. Edmund has been dead for 3 years, Lady Fairfax. I believe that's sufficient mourning by anyone's standards. Is it? Because it seems rather convenient that the moment your finances became desperate, you managed to snare the wealthiest unmarried duke in England. Elara set down her pen with deliberate care. Did you come here to insult me, or is there an actual purpose to this visit? Constance's smile was ugly. I came to warn you. You think you've won, but you haven't. You think marrying Vale will protect you, but it won't. Because I know the truth about Edmund's death, Elara. And if you don't give Charles what he wants, I'll make sure all of London knows it too. The room went very cold. Elara stood slowly, her hands flat on the desk. What truth would that be? That you pushed him, that he didn't fall down those stairs. You killed him, and I can prove it. Can you? Elara's voice was ice. Because the coroner ruled it an accident. The investigators found no evidence of foul play, and the only people in the house that night were myself and the servants, all of whom gave statements confirming I was in my chambers when Edmund fell. Servants lie, especially when their mistress pays them to. Then produce your evidence, Constance. Go to the authorities. Make your accusations public. Elara walked around the desk, moving closer. But know this. The moment you do, I'll have the full resources of the Duke of Vale's legal team investigating you. Your finances, your relationship with Edmund, the things you convinced him to do, the debts you encouraged, the people you introduced him to in those final months. Constance's face paled. Did you think I didn't know? Elara continued, her voice soft and deadly. I was his wife. I saw everything, every gambling debt, every mistress, every stupid investment you convinced him to make. You were bleeding him dry, Constance. And when he started to realize it, when he started to pull away, you got desperate. That's a lie, is it? Because I have Edmund's letters. I have his financial records. I have documentation of every pound that went from his accounts to yours. And if you force me to produce that documentation in court, the scandal won't just touch me, it'll destroy you. The silence stretched between them, taut as a wire. Finally, Constance stepped back, her hands trembling. You're bluffing. Try me. For a long moment, neither woman moved. Then Constance turned and fled, her silk skirts rustling in the sudden silence. Elara stood alone in her study, her heart hammering. She'd been bluffing, partially. She did have some of Edmund's papers, enough to raise questions about Constance's influence, but a full investigation would open doors she desperately wanted to keep closed, because Constance was right about one thing. Edmund hadn't fallen down those stairs. Elara had pushed him. But the memory came unbidden, unwelcome, as vivid as if it had happened yesterday instead of 3 years ago. She'd been in her chambers at Ravencross, reading by candlelight, when Edmund had burst through the door, drunk again, angry again, shouting about money, about her coldness, about how she'd ruined his life. She'd tried to leave, to escape to another room as she always did when he got like this. But this time he'd grabbed her arm, yanking her back so hard she'd stumbled. "You think you can just walk away from me?" he'd snarled, his breath hot and sour. "You think you're better than me?" "Edmund, please." He'd shoved her against the wall, his hands closing around her throat. Not tight enough to strangle, but enough to terrify, enough to make her vision blur. "You're nothing," he'd hissed. "Nothing but a bought and paid for broodmare who can't even manage that. 3 years and no heir. What good are you?" Something in Elara had broken in that moment, not her spirit, that had broken long ago, but her fear. The thing that had kept her silent, kept her still, kept her enduring. She'd stopped being afraid of dying. When Edmund finally released her and turned to leave, she'd followed him out into the hallway, followed him to the top of the grand staircase. And when he'd turned back, sneering, saying something cutting she no longer remembered, she'd pushed him, not hard, just enough. He'd been drunk, unsteady on his feet. He'd stumbled backward, arms pinwheeling, and then he was falling, tumbling down those marble steps with sickening thuds until he lay still at the bottom. She'd stood at the top of the stairs for a long time, watching him, waiting to feel guilt, horror, anything. All she'd felt was relief. The servants had found her there, shaking but composed. She'd told them Edmund had been drunk, that he'd lost his balance. They'd believed her because they'd seen his drunkenness 100 times before, because they'd heard the shouting, seen the bruises she tried to hide, because some of them had been relieved too. Now, standing in her London study 3 years later, Elara pressed her hands against the desk and forced herself to breathe. She'd killed her husband. That was the truth Constance threatened to expose. And if it came out, if anyone believed it, her marriage to Adrian would be destroyed before it began. She'd hang for murder, and Ravencross would be lost forever. But Constance had no proof, just suspicion and spite. And suspicion, Elara had learned, only mattered if people wanted to believe it. She straightened, smoothing her skirts, and returned to her letters. She had work to do, plans to finalize, a wedding to prepare for. The past could stay buried where it belonged. The week passed in a blur of activity. Adrian had meant what he said about war. Their engagement had been a declaration, and now they were executing a campaign. First came the social maneuvering. Adrian took Elara to a carefully selected series of events, a small dinner party here, an afternoon tea there, always with influential guests, always with strategic purpose. He introduced her as his future duchess, with such calm authority that objections died before they could be voiced. Lady Pemberton, who'd ignored Elara at the Ashford ball, suddenly became effusive in her greetings. Lord Hartwell, who'd been one of Edmund's drinking companions, offered careful congratulations. Even those who clearly disapproved kept their opinions to themselves, because no one insulted the Duke of Vale's chosen bride, not if they valued their social standing. But the real work happened behind closed doors. Adrian brought Elara to meetings with his solicitors, his bankers, his business partners. He included her in discussions about shipping routes and trade agreements and parliamentary votes. At first, the men in these rooms looked at her with barely concealed disdain, another duke's ornamental wife sitting quietly while the real work happened. Then Adrian asked her opinion on a contract dispute, and Elara spent 15 minutes dissecting the legal language, identifying 3 clauses that could be exploited in the duke's favor. The room had gone silent. "Extraordinary," murmured Adrian's head solicitor, a canny old man named Morrison. "Your Grace, where did you study contract law?" "I didn't," Elara replied. "But I managed my father's estate from the age of 16. You learn to read the fine print." After that, the men stopped looking through her and started listening when she spoke. Adrian never commented on it, never made a show of her contributions. He simply treated her participation as expected, as natural, until the others did the same. It was the opposite of everything Edmund had done, dismissing her ideas, mocking her opinions, ensuring she felt small and useless. Adrian made her feel dangerous. 3 days before the wedding, he brought her to his London residence, a massive townhouse in Grosvenor Square that made Ashford House look provincial. The butler, a dignified man named Greaves, greeted them with perfect formality. "Your Grace and my lady." He bowed to Elara. "Welcome. Your chambers have been prepared as requested." Adrian led her up the sweeping staircase to the third floor, where a suite of rooms overlooked the square. Sitting room, bedroom, dressing room, private study, all decorated in elegant blues and silvers, all clearly prepared with care. "This will be yours," Adrian said, gesturing around. "Entirely yours. I have my own chambers in the east wing. We can maintain separate spaces or not, as you prefer." Elara walked to the window, looking out at the manicured square below. "And if I prefer privacy?" "Then you'll have it." He joined her at the window, standing close enough that she could smell his cologne, sandalwood and something darker. "I meant what I said, Elara. This isn't a cage." She turned to face him. This close, she could see the details she'd missed before. The faint scar along his jawline, the silver threading through his dark hair at the temples, the lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled more than his reputation suggested. "Why me?" she asked quietly. "You could have had any woman in England, younger, prettier, from better families. Why choose a widow with a scandalous reputation and a mountain of debt?" Adrian was quiet for a moment, his gray eyes searching hers. Then he said, "Because every other woman I met wanted the Duke. The title, the money, the status. You're the only one who wanted to survive." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer I have." He stepped back, creating distance. "The wedding is Saturday morning, 11 o'clock, St. George's Chapel. Small ceremony as agreed, and then we begin the real work." His expression turned grim. "Charles filed a legal challenge this morning. He's claiming the marriage is invalid because you're still within the mourning period, that I coerced you, that the whole thing is a conspiracy to defraud the Whitcombe estate." Elara's hands clenched. "Can he actually do that?" "He can try. He won't succeed. The law is clear, and we have documentation proving every part of this arrangement was voluntary. But he can make noise, cause delays, drag us through the courts for months." "What do we do?" Adrian's smile was cold. "We accelerate. Once we're married, his claim becomes even weaker, and I have a few legal maneuvers of my own planned. By the time we're done, Charles Whitcombe will wish he'd accepted defeat gracefully." He left her alone in her new chambers, and Elara spent the evening exploring the space that would be hers. It was beautiful, luxurious, everything she should have wanted. But as she stood at the window watching the sun set over London, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing on the edge of a precipice. In 3 days, she would marry Adrian Vale. In 3 days, she would become a duchess, would gain the protection and resources she so desperately needed. But she would also become tied to a man she barely knew, a man who was intelligent, strategic, and potentially far more dangerous than Edmund had ever been. Because Edmund's cruelty had been simple, obvious, easy to predict, Adrian Vale was none of those things, and as Elara prepared for bed in her elegant new chambers, she couldn't quite silence the voice in her head whispering that she might be making the biggest mistake of her life. The wedding day arrived with unseasonable rain, dark clouds rolling over London like an omen. Elara stood in her chambers at Adrian's townhouse, studying herself in the mirror while Margaret made final adjustments to her gown. She'd chosen ivory silk rather than white. She was a widow, after all, with simple, elegant lines and minimal ornamentation. Her hair was swept up, a few curls framing her face, and she wore no jewelry except the strand of pearls that had belonged to her mother. She looked calm, composed, like a woman choosing to marry, not a woman being forced into it. The mask was perfect. "You look beautiful, ma'am," Margaret whispered, tears in her eyes. "Thank you." Elara's voice was steady. "Is the carriage ready?" "Yes, ma'am. His Grace is waiting downstairs." Elara took one last look at herself, at the woman who was about to become the Duchess of Vale, and walked out of the room. Adrian stood at the base of the stairs, dressed in formal morning wear, his expression unreadable. When he saw her descending, something flickered in his eyes. Approval, perhaps, or possession, or something else entirely. "You're ready?" he asked as she reached the bottom step. "As I'll ever be." He offered his arm, and they walked together to the waiting carriage. The ride to St. George's Chapel was silent, both of them lost in their own thoughts. The chapel was small, private, with only a handful of witnesses present. Adrian's solicitor Morrison, Vivian Cross representing Elara's interests, and two of Adrian's closest associates. No family, no friends, no society spectators, just a transaction being finalized. The ceremony itself was brief. Elara spoke her vows in a clear voice, feeling the weight of each word as it bound her irrevocably to this man, this choice, this future. Adrian's voice was firm when he pledged himself to her, his hand steady as he slipped the ring onto her finger, a simple gold band inscribed with words she'd read earlier. Strength in alliance, not love, not devotion, alliance. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the vicar intoned. "Your Grace, you may kiss your bride." Adrian turned to her, his expression carefully neutral. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. She didn't. His kiss was controlled, appropriate, exactly what the moment required. But there was heat beneath it, carefully banked, a reminder that this marriage, whatever else it was, would eventually involve more than contracts and strategy. When he pulled back, Elara saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Hunger. Not violent or demanding like Edmund's had been, but present nonetheless. A promise of things to come. They signed the register, accepted quiet congratulations from the witnesses, and walked out of the chapel as husband and wife. The rain had stopped. Weak sunlight broke through the clouds as they descended the chapel steps. And there, waiting across the street, was a crowd. Not invited guests, not well-wishers. Charles Whitcombe stood at their head, flanked by a group of men Elara didn't recognize. His face was twisted with rage. "Stop!" he shouted, loud enough to echo off the chapel walls. "I demand you stop this farce!" Adrian's expression didn't change, but Elara felt his arm tense beneath her hand. "The ceremony is complete, Whitcombe," Adrian said calmly. "Your objection is too late." "Is it? Because I have evidence." Charles pulled out a document, waving it like a weapon, "that proves this marriage is illegal, that the Countess coerced you, manipulated you, using information she shouldn't have." "What information?" Adrian's voice was dangerously quiet. Charles's smile was triumphant. "She murdered her husband, and I can prove it." The words hung in the air like poison. Elara felt the world tilt, felt every eye turn to her, felt the careful structure she'd built begin to crack. Charles stepped forward, emboldened by her silence. "I have a witness, someone who was there the night Edmund died, someone who saw exactly what happened." From the crowd behind him, a figure emerged, Constance Fairfax. She looked terrified but resolute, her hands clutching a shawl around her shoulders. "I'm sorry, Elara," she said, her voice carrying across the street, "but I can't let you destroy another man. I was there that night. I saw you at the top of the stairs. I saw you push him." The lie was so bold, so complete, that for a moment Elara couldn't breathe. Constance hadn't been there. She'd been in London. But she was gambling that no one could prove it, that the scandal alone would be enough to destroy Elara's credibility. And she was right. The whispers started immediately, rippling through the small crowd. Morrison looked shocked. Vivian looked furious. And Adrian looked at Elara with an expression she couldn't read. "Is it true?" he asked quietly, so only she could hear. This was the moment where everything could shatter. Elara could deny it, could claim Constance was lying, could fight back with every weapon she had. Or she could tell the truth. She looked at the man she'd just married, the man who held her entire future in his hands, and made her choice. "Not here," she said. "But yes, we need to talk." Adrian's carriage tore through London streets like a bullet, the wheels clattering so violently that Elara had to grip the seat to keep from being thrown sideways. Neither of them had spoken since climbing inside, leaving Charles and his mob of accusers standing outside the chapel. Morrison had stayed behind to manage the situation, to spin it, contain it, keep it from exploding across every gossip column in England before sunset. But Elara knew the truth. This couldn't be contained. Adrian sat across from her, his face carved from stone, his gray eyes fixed on some point beyond the window. His silence was worse than shouting, worse than Edmund's drunken rages, because she had no idea what he was thinking, what he was planning, whether the next words out of his mouth would be divorce or prison. The carriage finally stopped at his Grosvenor Square residence. He stepped out first, didn't offer his hand, and strode toward the entrance without looking back. Elara followed, her ivory wedding gown feeling like a shroud. Greaves materialized in the foyer, his expression carefully neutral. "Your Grace, your—" "Clear the house," Adrian said, his voice flat. "Everyone, now." "My lord." "I said clear it. Servants, staff, everyone out. Send them to the country estate for the week. Pay them double. I don't care. Just get them gone within the hour." Greaves's eyes widened fractionally, the only sign of surprise. Then he bowed. "At once, Your Grace." Adrian turned to Elara. "My study. Third door on the left." He walked away, leaving her standing alone in the massive entrance hall. She could hear Greaves already moving through the house, issuing quiet orders, the sound of hurried footsteps as servants scrambled to obey. Elara climbed the stairs on legs that felt disconnected from her body, found the study, stepped inside. It was a masculine room, dark wood, leather furniture, walls lined with books and maps. A fire crackled in the hearth despite the mild weather, casting dancing shadows across the floor. Adrian stood at the window, his back to her, one hand braced against the frame. "Close the door," he said. She did. The silence stretched. Elara's heart hammered so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. Finally, Adrian turned. His face was still unreadable, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "Tell me exactly what happened the night Edmund died. Every detail. Don't lie, don't embellish, just the truth." So she told him. She told him about Edmund's drinking, his violence, the years of degradation. She told him about the night he'd choked her, how something inside her had finally shattered. She told him about following Edmund to the stairs, about the push, about watching him fall. "I killed him," she said, her voice steady even as her hands shook. "Not in self-defense. He'd already let me go. I killed him because I wanted him dead, because I knew if I didn't, he'd eventually kill me instead." Adrian listened without interrupting, his expression giving nothing away. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Constance wasn't there." "No, she's lying." "Why?" "Because Charles is paying her, or promising her something, or both." Elara wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the fire. "She has no proof, but she doesn't need proof. The accusation alone is enough to destroy me. Us." Adrian moved to the sideboard and poured 2 glasses of whiskey. He handed her one, then downed his own in a single swallow. "You're right. The accusation is enough. By tomorrow morning, every newspaper in London will be printing speculation about the Countess-turned-Duchess who murdered her first husband and seduced the Duke of Vale to escape justice." "I'm sorry," Elara whispered. "I should have told you before. I should have—" "Yes, you should have." His voice was hard. "Because now I'm walking into a battle I didn't know I was fighting, with weapons I wasn't prepared to use. I'll understand if you want to—" "Want to what? Annul the marriage? Divorce you? Throw you to the wolves?" Adrian laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Do you have any idea what that would do to me, to my reputation? I'd be the fool who married a murderess without proper investigation. The Duke too blinded by lust or stupidity to see what was right in front of him." "Then what do you want?" He set down his glass with a sharp crack. "I want to know if you regret it." "What?" "Killing him." "Do you regret it?" Elara met his eyes. "No." The word hung between them, stark and uncompromising. Adrian's expression shifted, not softening, but something else, understanding, perhaps, or recognition. "Good," he said quietly, "because the only thing worse than being married to a murderess would be being married to someone who'd let herself be destroyed instead of fighting back." He crossed to his desk, pulled out a sheet of paper, and began writing with quick, decisive strokes. "Here's what's going to happen. First, we're going to prove Constance is lying. Morrison will subpoena her whereabouts for that night. If she was in London, there will be records. Hotel registers, servants' accounts, something. Second, we're going to investigate who's really behind this. Charles is a useful idiot, but someone's funding him, pushing him. Third, we need to find Edmund's doctor, Elara said suddenly. Adrian paused. What? Dr. Harwick. He attended Edmund regularly in those final months. He saw the bruises on me, the state Edmund was in. He never said anything publicly, doctor-patient confidentiality, but if he were subpoenaed, if he were forced to testify, he could provide context, evidence of abuse. Adrian's eyes sharpened. Where is he now? Yorkshire, I think. He left London after Edmund died. We'll find him. Adrian added another line to his list. What else? Think, Elara. What other leverage do we have? She forced herself to focus, to push past the panic. The servants at Ravencross. They were there that night. They all gave statements to the investigators saying Edmund was alone, that I was in my chambers. Statements that could be dismissed as loyalty to their mistress. Unless we find one who'll break ranks, someone who hated me enough to tell the truth, that Edmund was violent, that everyone in that house feared him. Elara's mind raced. There was a footman, Thomas something. Edmund fired him 2 weeks before he died for some minor infraction. He was bitter about it, said he'd make us both pay. Where is he? I don't know. But if Charles is building a case, if he's looking for witnesses... She looked at Adrian. He might have already found Thomas. Adrian's jaw tightened. Then we need to find him first. A knock at the door interrupted them. Greaves entered, looking apologetic. Forgive me, Your Grace, but there's a situation. Lord Whitcombe and several constables are at the gate. They're demanding entry. On what grounds? They have a warrant. Greaves handed over a folded document. For Her Grace's arrest. The room went cold. Adrian snatched the warrant, his eyes scanning the legal language. His expression darkened. This is a magistrate's warrant for questioning in connection with suspicious death. They can't arrest her, but they can compel her to answer questions under oath. If I refuse? Elara asked. They'll arrest you for obstruction, and that will make you look guilty. He crumpled the warrant in his fist. Damn it, Charles moved faster than I expected. What do we do? Adrian looked at her for a long moment, something calculating in his gaze. Then he straightened his shoulders, his expression shifting into the mask of aristocratic authority she'd seen him wear in public. We cooperate, but on our terms. Greaves, send word that Her Grace will attend questioning tomorrow morning at my solicitor's office. Not at the magistrate's court, not at Whitcombe's convenience, on neutral ground with legal representation present. They may not accept those terms, sir. They will. Because if they try to drag a duchess from her home on her wedding day without proper procedure, I'll have every newspaper in England writing about police overreach and persecution of the nobility. Adrian's smile was razor sharp. Sometimes reputation is a weapon. Greaves bowed and withdrew. Elara sank into a chair, her legs finally giving out. This is escalating too fast. By tomorrow they'll have me tried and convicted in the public mind. No. By tomorrow we'll have shifted the narrative. Adrian moved to her side, pulling up a chair so they were eye level. Listen to me carefully. You're not going to hide. You're not going to cower. Tomorrow morning, you're going to walk into that interrogation dressed like a duchess, composed as ice, and you're going to tell them exactly what happened, except for one detail. What detail? You didn't push Edmund. You were in your chambers. You heard him fall, came running, found him at the bottom of the stairs. His gray eyes held hers. That's the story. That's the truth. And every servant, every witness, every piece of evidence is going to support it. But Constance is going to recant, or be discredited, I don't care which. He stood, pacing now, energy crackling off him like lightning. Charles thinks he's outmaneuvered us. He thinks catching us at the chapel, making a public spectacle, getting this warrant, he thinks that's checkmate. But he's wrong, because he's playing chess while I'm playing war. What's the difference? In chess, you follow the rules. In war, you burn the board. Adrian stopped at his desk, pulling out a fresh sheet of paper. I'm calling in every favor I'm owed, every political alliance, every business connection, every piece of leverage I have. By the time we're done, Charles Whitcombe will wish he'd taken his loss quietly. Elara watched him work, watched the transformation from shocked husband to ruthless strategist. This was the man London feared. The man who'd built an empire from nothing, the man who didn't lose, and she just handed him the fight of his life. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly. He didn't look up from his writing. "Because you're my Duchess now, and I protect what's mine. Even if I'm guilty? Especially if you're guilty." He raised his eyes, meeting hers across the desk. Edmund Whitcombe was a brutal drunk who beat his wife. If you'd done nothing, he would have killed you eventually. What you did was survival, and I'll be damned if I let Charles Whitcombe or anyone else punish you for refusing to be a victim. Something cracked in Elara's chest. Not love, it was too soon for that, too complicated, but gratitude, and maybe the first whisper of trust. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet. This is going to get worse before it gets better." He finished writing, sealed the letter, rang for a messenger. "Get some rest. Tomorrow is going to be brutal." But rest was impossible. Elara spent the night in her new chambers, staring at the ceiling while her mind raced through every possible outcome. By dawn, she'd rehearsed her story 100 times, looking for holes, weaknesses, places where the truth might slip through. Margaret helped her dress in a gown of deep charcoal gray, somber without being mourning, expensive without being ostentatious. Her hair was pulled back severely, no jewelry except her wedding ring and the simple pearl earrings her mother had left her. She looked like exactly what she needed to be, a duchess who'd been wrongfully accused and was above such common scandal. Adrian met her in the foyer. He'd dressed with equal care. Black coat, pristine cravat, every inch the powerful duke. But when he looked at her, something softened in his expression. "Ready?" he asked. "No, but that's never stopped me before." His mouth quirked. "That's my Duchess." Morrison's office was on Fleet Street, a respectable location that suggested legitimacy without the intimidation of a court. When they arrived, a crowd had already gathered, reporters, curious onlookers, people who'd read the morning papers and wanted to see the scandal unfold in person. The headlines had been brutal. Duchess of Darkness. Did the Countess kill for a coronet? Murder most noble. Widow's deadly climb to power. The Black Widow of Mayfair. Elara kept her face blank as they pushed through the crowd, ignoring the shouted questions, the accusations, the desperate pleas for comment. Inside, Morrison's conference room had been set up like a courtroom. The magistrate, a florid man named Hendricks, sat at the head of the table. Charles occupied one side with his own solicitor, looking smug. Constance sat beside them, her hands folded demurely, eyes downcast. And at the far end, someone Elara hadn't expected. Lord Pemberton, Edmund's old hunting companion, the man who'd looked at her with such suspicion at the Ashford ball. "Lord Pemberton has requested to observe," Magistrate Hendricks said, his tone apologetic, "as a friend of the deceased." "How convenient," Adrian said dryly. "How many of Edmund's friends are planning to appear? Should we sell tickets?" "Your Grace, please." Hendricks gestured to the chairs. "Let's maintain decorum." They sat. Morrison arranged his papers with meticulous care, and then the questioning began. Hendricks started gently, establishing timeline, asking about Elara's marriage to Edmund, the state of the household. She answered carefully, truthfully, except for the one detail Adrian had told her to change. Then Charles's solicitor, a sharp-faced man named Graves, took over. "Lady Whitcombe, I beg your pardon, Your Grace. You claim you were in your chambers the night your husband died." "I was." "Alone?" "Yes." "No servants? No witnesses to verify this?" "My lady's maid had retired for the evening. I was reading." "How convenient that no one can corroborate your alibi." Graves smiled thinly. "And yet Lady Fairfax claims she saw you at the top of the stairs just before Lord Whitcombe fell." "Lady Fairfax is mistaken, or lying." "Strong words, Your Grace," Morrison interjected smoothly. "Lady Fairfax's statement is inconsistent with multiple other accounts. We have documentation proving she was in London the night in question, not at Ravencross Manor." Graves didn't flinch. "Then perhaps she's confused about the specific date, but she's quite clear about what she saw, the Duchess standing over Lord Whitcomb's body, showing no emotion, no distress." "That's because I was in shock," Elara said. "My husband had just died. I was attempting to maintain composure." "Or you felt no grief because you'd just murdered him." "Objection," Morrison snapped. This is questioning, not a trial. Mr. Graves is editorializing. Hendricks sighed. Sustained. Mr. Graves, please confine yourself to questions. Graves shuffled his papers. Very well, Your Grace. Were you aware that Lord Whitcombe had recently changed his will? Elara's stomach dropped. What? 2 weeks before his death, Lord Whitcombe drafted a new will. It left Ravencross Manor to his cousin Charles, rather than to you. The room went silent. That's impossible, Elara said, her voice shaking. I never saw any such document. Nevertheless, it exists. We have the original draft from his solicitor. Graves produced a paper with a flourish. Which gives you an excellent motive for murder, doesn't it? If Lord Whitcombe died before signing the final version, the old will would stand, the one that left everything to you. Adrian's hand found hers under the table, gripping tight. Morrison leaned forward. May I see that document? Graves handed it over. Morrison scanned it, his expression darkening. This is unsigned, undated. It could have been drafted at any time by anyone. It's dated, Graves countered. October 14th, 2 weeks before Lord Whitcombe's death. The date means nothing without a signature. This proves nothing except that someone, possibly Lord Whitcombe, possibly not, considered changing his will. Morrison set the paper down with disgust. Unless you have a signed, witnessed, properly executed document, this is irrelevant. It establishes motive. It establishes speculation. Adrian's voice cut across the room like a blade. And unless you have actual evidence, not rumors, not suppositions, not convenient forgeries, I suggest you stop wasting everyone's time. Hendricks looked uncomfortable. Your Grace, please allow Mr. Graves to proceed. Why? So he can continue this character assassination masquerading as investigation? Adrian stood, pulling Elara up with him. My wife has answered your questions. She's cooperated fully. And unless you're prepared to charge her with an actual crime supported by actual evidence, this interrogation is over. Sit down, Your Grace, Hendricks said sharply. I haven't dismissed you. You don't have the authority to compel me, or her. Adrian's eyes were winter cold. The warrant was for questioning. She's been questioned. We're leaving. If you leave now, I'll issue a warrant for obstruction. Do it, and I'll have you removed from the bench for abuse of power. Adrian leaned forward, his voice dropping to something deadly. Do you know who appoints magistrates in this district, Hendricks? Do you know whose recommendation carries the most weight? Mine. And if you think Charles Whitcombe's money can protect you better than my displeasure can destroy you, you're even stupider than you look. Hendricks's face went purple, but before he could respond, the door burst open. Dr. Harwick stood there, rain-soaked and breathing hard, with Morrison's clerk hovering anxiously behind him. I apologize for the intrusion, Harwick said, his voice shaking. But I was told this matter concerned Lady Whitcombe, her Grace, and I have information that must be heard. Hendricks recovered his composure. Who are you? Dr. James Harwick. I was Lord Edmund Whitcomb's personal physician for the last year of his life. He moved into the room, water dripping from his coat. And I can testify that Lord Whitcombe was a violent alcoholic who routinely beat his wife. The room erupted. Charles lunged to his feet. That's a lie! Sit down, Lord Whitcombe, Hendricks barked. Harwick pulled documents from his satchel, spreading them on the table. Medical records. Every time I was called to attend her Grace for injuries Lord Whitcombe claimed were from falls or accidents. Bruises consistent with strangulation, fractured ribs, a dislocated shoulder. His voice hardened. I documented everything because I knew one day he'd kill her, and I wanted evidence. Elara stared at the papers, her vision blurring. She'd thought Harwick had been Edmund's creature, loyal only to his fee. She'd never known he'd been recording it all. Morrison seized the documents, scanning them rapidly. These are dated, witnessed, signed. They're fake, Charles snarled, fabricated to protect her. They're real, Harwick said quietly, and I'll swear to their authenticity under oath in any court in England. He turned to Elara, his eyes full of regret. I'm sorry, Your Grace. I should have intervened, should have reported him, but I was a coward, and I let it continue. Why come forward now? Hendricks asked. Because I heard what was happening. Heard she was being accused of murder when the real crime was what was done to her. Harwick straightened. Edmund Whitcombe was dying anyway. The amount he drank, his liver was failing. He had perhaps 6 months left. So if her grace did push him, all she did was accelerate the inevitable. The silence was absolute. Then Pemberton spoke for the first time, his voice rough. I knew. Everyone turned to stare at him. I knew Edmund was violent, Pemberton continued, not meeting anyone's eyes. We all did. His friends, his drinking companions, we joked about it, said he needed to keep his wife in line, that she was too proud, too cold. We encouraged it. His hands clenched. I came here today planning to speak against her, to say she was manipulative, calculating, but I can't, because if she did kill him, we're all complicit, every man who knew what he was doing and said nothing. Charles looked like he'd been struck. You're lying. Edmund strangled a housemaid at your club 3 years ago, Pemberton said flatly. I was there. I helped cover it up, paid her off to keep quiet. And there were others. You knew, Charles. You all knew. Graves started gathering his papers. My lord, I don't think— Shut up, Charles hissed. Then to Hendricks, this doesn't prove anything. So Edmund was rough with his wife. So what? That doesn't give her the right to murder him. Actually, it does, Adrian said quietly. It's called self-defense. She wasn't defending herself. She pushed him when he wasn't attacking her. How do you know? Morrison challenged. Were you there? No, but then you're speculating. And speculation isn't evidence. Morrison stood, gathering Harwick's documents. Magistrate Hendricks, I move that all charges be dismissed. You have no physical evidence, no credible witnesses, and now you have medical documentation proving the deceased was an abuser. This entire proceeding is a waste of the court's time. Hendricks looked between them all, his face a mask of indecision. Finally, he said, I'm dismissing the questioning for now. But this matter isn't closed. I'll be reviewing all evidence and— That's not good enough, Adrian interrupted. Dismiss it, permanently. Or I'll make sure every newspaper in London knows that a magistrate attempted to prosecute a duchess for defending herself against a man who was slowly killing her. You're threatening me. I'm offering you a choice. Make the right one. For a long, terrible moment, no one moved. Then Hendricks slammed his hand on the table. Fine. Dismissed. All of it. Get out of my sight. Adrian didn't wait for him to change his mind. He took Elara's arm and propelled her toward the door, Morrison and Harwick following close behind. They emerged into chaos. The crowd had tripled in size, reporters screaming questions, constables trying to maintain order. But Adrian cut through it like a ship through water, shielding Elara with his body, his expression so forbidding that people actually fell back. They reached the carriage, climbed inside. The door slammed shut, and suddenly they were moving, the noise fading behind them. Elara couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The adrenaline that had carried her through the interrogation evaporated, leaving her shaking so hard her teeth chattered. It's over, Adrian said. Elara, it's over. You're safe. For how long? Her voice cracked. Charles will appeal. He'll find other witnesses, other evidence. He won't stop. Neither will I. She looked at him, this man she'd married less than 24 hours ago, this stranger who'd just gone to war for her. Why? She whispered. Why fight this hard? Adrian was quiet for a moment. Then he said, because when I was building my empire, there were 100 men who tried to destroy me, called me a commoner, an upstart, not worthy of the title I'd earned. They used every legal trick, every social weapon, every lie they could manufacture. And I learned something. The moment you show weakness, the moment you let them think they've won, they never stop coming. He turned to face her fully, his gray eyes intense. You survived, Edmund Whitcombe. You survived 3 years of grief and debt and scandal. You looked at an impossible situation and found a way through. That's not weakness, Elara. That's steel. And I'll be damned if I let Charles Whitcombe or anyone else break you now. Something shifted in her chest. Not just gratitude this time. Something deeper. What happens next? She asked. Next, we destroy Charles Whitcombe so thoroughly he'll never threaten you again. Adrian's smile was cold. And then we go to Yorkshire and save your estate. The carriage pulled up to Grosvenor Square. Adrian helped her out, and they climbed the steps together. Greaves met them at the door, his face pale. Your Grace, there's been a development. What now? A fire, sir, at Ravencross Manor. Reports just arrived. The main house is damaged, possibly destroyed. Elara's world tilted. What? The message says it started in the East Wing last night, spread quickly. They're still fighting it, but... Greaves handed Adrian the telegram. Adrian scanned it, his expression darkening. It wasn't an accident. The message says they found evidence of accelerant. Someone set this fire deliberately. Charles. The name crystallized in Elara's mind with perfect clarity. Charles had set fire to Ravencross, either to destroy evidence or to punish her, or simply because he could. How bad? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. They don't know yet. But if the main house is gone... Adrian didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Ravencross was everything. Her home, her childhood, the only place she'd ever felt safe. The place she'd been fighting so hard to save. And now it was burning. Elara felt something crack inside her, not despair but fury, white-hot, incandescent rage. We're going to Yorkshire, she said. Elara, now, tonight. I need to see it. I need to know what's left. Adrian studied her for a moment, then nodded. We'll leave within the hour. Greaves, prepare the traveling coach and send word ahead. Morrison, I want you to investigate the fire. Find out who set it, how they got access, everything. Yes, Your Grace. Elara climbed the stairs to her chambers on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. Margaret was already there, already packing, tears streaming down her face. Oh, ma'am, she sobbed. Ravencross? I know. Elara's voice was hard. Pack quickly, we're leaving. She changed into traveling clothes, her movements mechanical. But as she fastened the last button, she caught sight of herself in the mirror. She looked different, harder. Like the woman who'd pushed Edmund down the stairs had finally stopped pretending to be anything else. The Duchess of Vale stared back at her, and for the first time since that terrible night 3 years ago, Elara didn't look away. When she descended the stairs an hour later, Adrian was waiting. The coach was ready, horses stamping impatiently. It's a 10-hour journey, he said. We'll arrive after midnight. I don't care. They climbed into the coach, and it lurched into motion. London fell away behind them, the city lights fading into darkness as they headed north. Elara sat in silence, watching the countryside blur past, her mind fixed on one single truth. Charles Whitcombe had made this personal. He'd attacked her in court, accused her of murder, and now he'd destroyed her home. And she was done being the victim. Somewhere in the darkness, Adrian's hand found hers. We'll rebuild it, he said quietly. No. Elara's voice was steel. We'll burn him first, then we'll rebuild. She felt Adrian's grip tighten, approval, or perhaps recognition. Because the Countess who'd walked into the Ashford ball 3 weeks ago, uncertain and alone, was gone. In her place sat a duchess, with nothing left to lose and a husband who knew how to wage war. And Charles Whitcombe had just made the worst mistake of his life. The smell hit them first. Smoke and ash carried on the wind, acrid and choking even a mile from Ravencross. Dawn was breaking over the Yorkshire moors, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and angry red, and Elara pressed her face to the carriage window as the estate finally came into view. Her breath caught. The East Wing was gone. Completely gone. Where the library and morning room in Edmund's study had stood for 300 years, there was now only blackened stone and skeletal beams reaching toward the sky like accusing fingers. The central structure had survived, barely, but smoke damage streaked the limestone facade, and half the roof had collapsed inward. Adrian's hand found her shoulder. Elara, stop the carriage. Her voice was hollow. I need to see it. The coach halted at the edge of the circular drive, and Elara stepped out before it fully stopped. The ground was still wet from the firefighting efforts, mud and ash mixing into a gray sludge that clung to her boots as she walked toward what remained of her childhood home. People were everywhere, tenants, servants, villagers from the nearby town, all working to salvage what they could. Furniture sat in haphazard piles on the lawn, water-damaged and smoke-stained. A crew was on the roof of the West Wing, covering holes with canvas to prevent further rain damage. And there, directing the operations with the authority of a general commanding troops, was her steward. Mrs. Rothwell, Elara called. The older woman turned, her face streaked with soot and exhaustion. Then her expression crumpled with relief. My lady, Your Grace, thank heaven you've come. They met in the middle of the ruined drive. Mrs. Rothwell was a sturdy Yorkshire woman who'd managed Ravencross for 20 years, first under Edmund's father and then under Edmund himself. She'd been the one who'd held things together after Edmund's death, who'd kept the tenants from abandoning the estate entirely. Now she looked like she'd aged a decade overnight. How bad? Elara asked. The East Wing is a total loss. The main staircase collapsed. We lost the library, all of it, my lady, every book, every document. The art collection in the gallery is ruined. Water damage throughout the central rooms from the firefighting. Mrs. Rothwell's voice shook. We saved the West Wing and the servants' quarters, and the stables, thank heaven, but the rest— Adrian had joined them, his expression grim as he surveyed the damage. When did it start? Around midnight, Your Grace. One of the stable boys saw flames in the library windows and raised the alarm. We fought it for hours, but it spread so fast. She stopped, swallowing hard. There was something wrong about it, the way it moved. It shouldn't have spread that quickly. Because it was set deliberately, Elara said, with accelerant. Mrs. Rothwell's eyes widened. Who would— Charles Whitcombe, or someone working for him. Elara looked at the ruins, her jaw tight. He couldn't destroy me in court, so he decided to destroy this instead. We need proof, Adrian said. Mrs. Rothwell, where did the fire start exactly? The library, Your Grace. The investigator from York is examining it now. He's in what's left of the East Wing. They found him 20 minutes later, a thin man with spectacles and soot-stained clothing picking through the debris with methodical care. He looked up as they approached, his expression professionally neutral. Your Grace. Your Grace. He bowed to each of them in turn. Inspector Wallace, at your service. I'm sorry for the circumstances of our meeting. What have you found? Adrian asked. Wallace gestured to a section of charred flooring. Multiple points of ignition, all in this room. Someone poured lamp oil in a deliberate pattern, here, and here, then lit it. The fire spread from the library to the connecting rooms, moved up through the walls. Classic arson pattern. Can you prove it? Elara demanded. I can testify to the evidence. Whether that constitutes legal proof— Wallace shrugged. That's for the magistrate to decide. But in my professional opinion, this was definitely arson. I want a full written report, Adrian said. Detailed, documented, signed, and witnessed. Can you have it ready by tomorrow? I can, Your Grace, though I should warn you, proving who set the fire will be harder than proving it was set at all. Leave that part to me. They left Wallace to his work and returned to the drive, where more people had gathered. Elara recognized faces, tenant farmers, village shopkeepers, servants she'd known since childhood. They watched her with expressions ranging from pity to suspicion to barely concealed hostility. One man stepped forward, cap in his weathered hands, Tom Fletcher, who farmed the northern acreage. Begging your pardon, Your Grace, but we've been hearing things. Hearing Lord Whitcomb's cousin is saying the estate should be his, saying you're not fit to manage it, and now this fire. He trailed off, the implication clear. You think I did this? Elara's voice was dangerously quiet. Fletcher wouldn't meet her eyes. I'm just saying what people are saying, ma'am, that you were in London when it happened, that you might have had someone— I was being interrogated for murder when this fire started. Elara cut him off, her voice ringing across the assembled crowd. I was in a magistrate's office in London, defending myself against false accusations while someone burned down my home. So no, Tom Fletcher, I did not set this fire. Charles Whitcombe did, or someone working for him, because he wants this estate and he's willing to destroy it to get it. The crowd shifted uneasily. But he made a mistake, Elara continued, her voice gaining strength. He thought burning Ravencross would break me. He thought it would prove I couldn't manage this place, couldn't protect it. Instead, he's just shown everyone exactly what he is, a coward, who attacks from the shadows instead of facing his enemies directly. Pretty words, a woman called from the back. But what are you going to do about it? The house is half destroyed, the debts are still there, and Lord Whitcomb's cousin has the law on his side. Elara recognized the voice. Sarah Blackwood, a widow who ran the village bakery and had never hidden her contempt for the gentry. She pushed to the front of the crowd, arms crossed. What am I going to do? Elara repeated. I'm going to rebuild. I'm going to restore this estate to profitability, and I'm going to make sure every person who depends on Ravencross has a future worth fighting for. With what money? Sarah challenged. You're drowning in debt. Everyone knows it. Not anymore. Adrian stepped forward, his presence immediately commanding attention. The Duke of Vale has assumed the Ravencross debts. They're cleared, paid in full as of this morning. The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs. Furthermore, Adrian continued, his voice cutting through the noise, I'm investing £50,000 in estate improvements, new equipment for the farms, repairs to tenant cottages, development of the coal seam on the eastern boundary, and establishment of a textile mill on the river. Ravencross isn't dying. It's about to become the most profitable estate in Yorkshire. Silence. Absolute stunned silence. Then Fletcher spoke, his voice cautious. You'd do all that? For an estate that's not even yours? It's my wife's, Adrian said simply, which makes it worth protecting. And the workers? Sarah pressed. The tenant farmers, the mill workers, the miners? What happens to them if this grand plan fails? It won't fail, Elara said, because I'm not leaving. I'm staying right here, managing every aspect of this operation personally. You want proof I can run this estate? You'll have it. Every day, every decision, every success, and every setback. I'll be here. She looked around at the assembled crowd, meeting eyes, holding gazes. I know what you've heard about me. That I killed my husband. That I married the Duke for his money. That I'm a cold, calculating woman who cares nothing for the people who work this land. Maybe some of that's true. Maybe all of it is. But here's what else is true. I grew up in that house. She pointed to the smoking ruins. I learned to ride on these grounds. I know every tenant family by name, every child, every struggle. This isn't just property to me, it's home, and I will not let Charles Whitcombe or anyone else take it. The silence stretched. Then slowly, Fletcher removed his cap and bowed his head. I believe you, Your Grace, and if you're willing to fight for Ravencross, so am I. One by one, others nodded. Not everyone. Sarah Blackwood still looked skeptical, and several tenants in the back remained stone-faced. But it was a start. Mrs. Rothwell stepped forward, her eyes bright with tears. What do you need from us, my lady? Everything. Elara turned to survey the damage again, her mind already calculating, planning. We need to stabilize the remaining structure before more of it collapses. We need to salvage everything possible from the ruins. We need to assess which rooms can be restored and which need to be rebuilt entirely. And we need to do it fast, before Charles uses this disaster to petition the courts for emergency oversight. That's a month's work at least, Mrs. Rothwell said doubtfully. Then we have a month. Elara looked at Adrian. Can you stay? As long as you need me. Good. Because I'm going to need your expertise. She turned back to the crowd. Anyone willing to work on the restoration will be paid double wages. We're hiring masons, carpenters, laborers, anyone with skill and a strong back. Spread the word. We start tomorrow at dawn. The crowd began to disperse, people talking in low, urgent voices. Adrian drew Elara aside, his expression concerned. Are you sure about this? Staying here, managing the restoration yourself, it's going to be brutal work. I know. And Charles will use it against you. He'll say you abandon your duties as Duchess, that you're obsessed with this place, that you're neglecting your responsibilities. Let him. Elara's eyes were hard. I'm done playing by society's rules. They've never protected me, never helped me. The only thing that's ever kept me alive is fighting back. So that's what I'm going to do. Adrian studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Then we fight. Together. The next 2 weeks were a blur of exhausting, relentless work. Elara rose before dawn each day and didn't stop until long after sunset, moving between the restoration crews, the tenant farms, the planning sessions with engineers and architects. She climbed scaffolding in boots and work dresses, examined foundation stones covered in ash, argued with builders about structural integrity and cost overruns. Adrian was beside her through it all, his business acumen cutting through problems like a scalpel. He negotiated better prices with suppliers, restructured the farm contracts to incentivize productivity, brought in experts from his own properties to advise on the coal and textile operations. And slowly, impossibly, Ravencross began to transform. The ruined east wing was demolished completely, the debris cleared away. But instead of simply rebuilding what had been lost, Elara made a bold choice. She redesigned it. The new east wing would be practical, modern, built for business rather than aristocratic display. A proper estate office with meeting rooms and document storage, a laboratory for testing soil and crops, a nursery for starting tree seedlings to reforest the depleted woodlands. "You're building a working estate, not a showpiece," Vivian Cross observed during one of her visits from London. She'd come to check on her consortium's investment and stayed 3 days, fascinated by what Elara was creating. "Showpieces don't survive," Elara replied. They were standing in what would become the new estate office, reviewing architectural plans by lamplight. "They crack under pressure. I need something built to last." "And the village? They're coming around?" "Some of them." Elara gestured toward the window where lights glowed in the valley below. "Fletcher and his family are solid now. A few others. But Sarah Blackwood still thinks I'm a disaster waiting to happen. And there are whispers, people saying the fire was judgment, that Ravencross is cursed, that I should let Charles have it and leave." "Are you tempted?" "No." The answer came without hesitation. "Every day I'm here, every decision I make that works, every problem I solve, it proves them wrong. Charles wanted to break me. Instead, he gave me exactly what I needed." "What's that?" "A reason to stop hiding." Vivian smiled. "You've changed, Elara. When I first met you, you were all careful control, keeping your real self buried. Now you're—" "Dangerous?" Elara supplied. "I was going to say free, but dangerous works too." The transformation wasn't just in the estate. It was in Elara herself. The masks she'd worn for so long, the dutiful wife, the proper countess, the woman who made herself small to survive, were cracking away, revealing something harder underneath, something that scared her sometimes, but also something that felt true. Adrian noticed it too. One evening, after a particularly grueling day overseeing the coal seam excavation, they sat together in the one intact drawing room, reviewing the week's expenses. He'd removed his jacket, rolled up his shirt sleeves, and there was dust in his hair from climbing through the mining tunnels. He looked more alive than she'd ever seen him in London. "You're enjoying this," she said, surprised. He glanced up from the ledger. "What?" "The work. The building. All of it. I thought you'd hate being stuck in Yorkshire, away from Parliament and society and your shipping empire. But you look content." Adrian leaned back, considering. "I built my first fortune in places like this. Dirty, difficult, with people who thought I'd fail. London politics is all performance and positioning. This," he gestured around, "this is real. You can see the results of your decisions immediately. No waiting months to see if a bill passes or an alliance holds. Just action and consequence." "Do you miss it?" "London. Parts of it." His gray eyes met hers. "But not as much as I expected. And certainly not enough to abandon this." "We can't stay here forever," Elara said quietly. "Eventually we'll have to return, face Charles in court, deal with the social fallout from all of this." "I know, but not yet." Adrian set down his pen. "Right now we're building something, and I want to see it finished." The moment hung between them, charged with something unspoken. They were sitting closer than they'd ever been, the lamplight making the space feel intimate despite the room's grandeur. "Adrian," Elara said carefully, "this marriage has been a business arrangement," he finished. "I know, that was the agreement. But it doesn't feel like just business anymore." His expression shifted, surprise perhaps, or hope. "No, it doesn't." "I don't know what it feels like," Elara admitted. "I've never had a partnership before. Edmund controlled everything, and before him my father. I don't know how to be with someone who treats me as an equal." "Neither do I," Adrian said. "Every relationship I've had has been transactional. Political alliances, business arrangements, women who wanted the title. You're the first person who's wanted the work more than the reward." Elara laughed, surprising herself. "That makes us sound terribly unromantic." "Maybe, or maybe it makes us honest." He reached across the small table between them, his hand stopping just short of touching hers. "I don't know what this is either, Elara, but I know I want to find out." She closed the distance, lacing her fingers through his. His grip was warm, solid, real. "So do I." she said. The breakthrough came on a cold morning 3 weeks after the fire, when a rider arrived from London carrying a leather satchel full of documents. Morrison had come himself, his expression grim but triumphant as he spread papers across Elara's makeshift desk in the new estate office. "We found him," Morrison said. "Thomas Hartley, the footman Edmund fired. He's been working for Charles for the past month, gathering evidence against you." "Let me guess," Adrian said darkly. "He's prepared to testify that he saw Elara push Edmund." "Not quite, because we found something better." Morrison pulled out a signed statement, his smile sharp. "Hartley's confession. Turns out Charles promised him £500 to lie under oath, but Charles never paid up, waiting until after the testimony," he said. "So Hartley got nervous and started talking to the wrong people. One of them happened to be one of my investigators." Elara scanned the confession, her heart pounding. It was all there: Charles's instructions, the promised payment, even details about the fire. "He helped set it?" she breathed. "He provided access, let Charles's man onto the estate, showed him where to find the lamp oil." Morrison's expression was ice-cold professional satisfaction. "It's all documented, signed, witnessed, notarized, enough to put Charles in prison for arson and conspiracy." "Does Charles know we have this?" Adrian asked. "Not yet. I wanted you to decide how to use it." Elara looked at the documents, then at Adrian. "We need to move fast. If Charles hears we have this, he'll run or destroy evidence or find some way to wriggle out of it." "Agreed." Adrian turned to Morrison. "How quickly can you get a magistrate to issue a warrant?" "With this evidence? By tonight." "Do it. And send word to London. I want every newspaper editor I have leverage with ready to print this story the moment Charles is arrested. I want his name destroyed so thoroughly he'll never show his face in public again." Morrison gathered his papers. "Consider it done, Your Grace." After he left, Elara sank into her chair, the reality of it washing over her. They'd won. Not completely. There would still be legal proceedings, still be social consequences, but they had proof. Undeniable, documented proof that Charles had committed crimes, had lied, had tried to destroy her. "It's over," she said, almost disbelieving. "Not quite." Adrian pulled her into her feet, his hands on her shoulders. "This ends Charles's legal threat. But the real test is whether you can make Ravencross succeed, whether you can prove to everyone, the tenants, the investors, London society, that you're not just surviving, but thriving." "I know." Elara looked out the window at the construction crews working on the new East Wing, at the smoke rising from the newly opened coal mine, at the framework of the textile mill taking shape along the river. "And I will. We will." Debts. Charles Whitcombe was arrested 4 days later at his London club, dragged out in front of dozens of witnesses and charged with conspiracy to commit arson and attempted fraud. The story hit every major newspaper the next morning, complete with excerpts from Hartley's confession and Wallace's arson report. The scandal was absolute. Within a week, Charles's allies had abandoned him. His creditors called in his debts. His mistress left for the continent, and Constance Fairfax, facing potential perjury charges for her false testimony, recanted everything and fled to Scotland. The magistrate who'd overseen Elara's interrogation quietly retired, claiming health concerns. And in Yorkshire, something remarkable was happening. The new coal mine hit a rich seam, far more extensive than the initial surveys had predicted. The textile mill secured contracts with 3 major London fashion houses, drawn by the quality of the local wool and the efficiency of the new equipment. The reforested woodlands began showing growth, promising timber revenue in future years. Tenant farmers who'd been struggling for years suddenly had access to better tools, better techniques, better markets for their goods. Children who'd never had schooling were enrolled in a new estate school Elara established in the renovated servants' quarters. The village of Ravencross, which had been dying slowly for decades, began to grow. Sarah Blackwood grudgingly admitted that maybe, just maybe, the Duchess knew what she was doing. Fletcher started bringing other farmers to the estate office, asking for Elara's advice on crop rotation and livestock management. The suspicious whispers faded, replaced by cautious respect. And through it all, Elara worked alongside them, not as a distant aristocrat giving orders, but as someone who understood that leadership meant standing in the mud with your people, solving problems together, sharing the risk and the reward. She'd become what Edmund never was, a true steward of the land and its people. 6 weeks after the fire, Elara stood in the completed estate office, looking at the maps and plans covering the walls. The new East Wing was nearly finished. The coal operation was profitable. The textile mill was producing its first bolts of fabric. Ravencross was alive again. Adrian entered behind her carrying 2 glasses of wine. He handed her one, then stood beside her, surveying their work. "Vivian sent word," he said. "The consortium wants to double their investment. They're calling Ravencross a model for modern estate management." "Are they?" Elara smiled. "And here I thought we were just trying to survive." "We were. Now we're thriving." He turned to face her. "You did this, Elara. Not me, not the money, not the title. You took a dying estate and made it into something extraordinary." "We did it," she corrected. "I couldn't have done this alone." "Neither could I." Adrian's expression softened. "I meant what I said in London. This started as a business arrangement, but somewhere along the way it became something else." Elara set down her glass, her heart racing. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want this to be real, not just a partnership or an alliance or a convenient arrangement. Real." He took her hand, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. "If you want that too." She'd spent so long being afraid of men, of marriage, of losing herself again. But looking at Adrian now, at this man who'd fought beside her, who'd believed in her when everyone else saw only scandal and weakness, she realized the fear was gone, replaced by something she'd thought was lost to her forever. Hope. "I do," she said. "I want that. I want us." He kissed her then, and it was nothing like their wedding kiss. This was fire and promise and the beginning of something neither of them had planned, but both of them wanted. When they finally pulled apart, Elara was breathless, her cheeks flushed. "We should return to London soon," Adrian said, his forehead resting against hers. "Show society that we're not hiding, that we won." "Soon," Elara agreed, "but not yet. I want to see the harvest first. Want to make sure the mill is fully operational. Want to make sure this is permanent," he finished. "I understand. We'll stay as long as you need." But fate, as it turned out, had other plans. The next morning, a carriage arrived bearing a passenger who made Elara's blood run cold. The Lord Chancellor of England himself, accompanied by 2 of the king's advisors. They were shown into the drawing room where Elara and Adrian received them with carefully controlled expressions. "Your Graces," the Lord Chancellor said, his tone grave, "I'm afraid I bring difficult news. There's been an investigation into the recent fire and the allegations surrounding it. The Crown has reviewed all evidence, including Lord Charles Whitcombe's arrest and the statements from various witnesses." Elara's hands clenched in her lap. This was it, the other shoe dropping, the moment when all their work would be swept away by royal decree. "And?" Adrian's voice was dangerously quiet. "And the Crown finds that Her Grace, the Duchess of Vale, has been grievously wronged, not only by Lord Whitcombe's criminal actions, but by the initial investigation into her late husband's death, which failed to account for evidence of ongoing abuse." The Lord Chancellor pulled out an official document, sealed with the royal crest. "His Majesty hereby exonerates Her Grace of all accusations related to Edmund Whitcombe's death. Furthermore, the Crown recognizes her management of Ravencross Estate as exemplary and wishes to commission her expertise in advising on agricultural reforms across the Northern Territories." The room went utterly silent. "I'm sorry," Elara said faintly. "Could you repeat that?" "You've been exonerated, Your Grace, completely. The King himself has taken an interest in what you've accomplished here. He wants you to help replicate it across England's struggling estates." Elara looked at Adrian, who appeared equally stunned. "There's more," the Lord Chancellor continued. "As restitution for the damage to your reputation and property, the Crown is awarding you a grant of £30,000 for continued estate development, along with a formal apology for the investigation's deficiencies." Elara couldn't find words. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll accept, Your Grace. England needs people like you. People who understand that the old ways are dying and new methods are required. People who've proven they can rebuild from ashes." Adrian's hand found hers under the table, squeezing tight. "I accept," Elara said, her voice gaining strength. "On behalf of Ravencross and everyone who depends on it, we accept." After the officials left, Elara walked out onto the terrace overlooking the estate. Below, workers moved like ants across the property, building, planting, creating her property, her people, her future. Adrian joined her, wrapping an arm around her waist. "From widow under suspicion to duchess in the king's favor," he said. "Quite the transformation." "I'm still the same person who pushed Edmund down those stairs," Elara said quietly. "No, you're not." Adrian turned her to face him. "That woman was cornered, desperate, alone. This woman," he gestured at the thriving estate below, "this woman built an empire from ruins. There's a difference." Elara looked down at Ravencross, at everything they'd created, and felt something settle in her chest. Not quite peace. She wasn't sure she'd ever have that, but certainty. She'd survived Edmund. Survived the accusations, the fire, the attempts to destroy her. And she'd done more than survive. She'd won. "What happens now?" she asked. Adrian smiled. "Now we change England. Together." And standing there on the terrace of her rebuilt home, with her husband beside her, and her future spreading out like a promise, Elara Whitcombe, the Duchess of Vale, the woman who refused to kneel, finally believed him. 3 months later, Elara stood in the grand ballroom of Ashford House, the same room where she'd refused Adrian's invitation to dance what felt like a lifetime ago, and watched London's elite circle her with expressions ranging from awe to barely concealed envy. The reconstruction of Ravencross had made headlines. The king's endorsement had made her untouchable. And the fact that she'd turned a crumbling, debt-ridden estate into one of the most profitable properties in England had made her dangerous in an entirely new way. Women who'd snubbed her 6 months ago now competed for her attention, eager to hear about modern estate management and agricultural reform. Men who'd dismissed her as Edmund's cold widow now sought her opinion on investments and property development. And the whispers, those vicious, cutting whispers that had followed her everywhere, had been replaced by a different kind of murmur. Respect. "You look like you're planning someone's murder," Vivian Cross said, appearing at Elara's elbow with 2 glasses of champagne. "Please tell me it's not mine." Elara accepted the glass, her mouth quirking. "I'm deciding whether to enjoy this or be disturbed by how quickly people forget their own cruelty." "Enjoy it. They're shallow creatures who follow power like moths to flame. You have power now, so they orbit you. It's the natural order." Vivian gestured around the ballroom. "Besides, half of them are terrified you'll remember how they treated you and exact revenge." "Should I?" "Only if it's profitable." They watched the crowd together for a moment. Then Vivian said, more quietly, "Charles Whitcombe's trial starts next week. Morrison says the case is airtight, 10 years minimum for the arson alone, possibly more when they add the fraud and conspiracy charges." Elara felt nothing at the news. Not satisfaction, not pity, just a cold, distant acknowledgement that justice was being served. And Constance fled to Edinburgh. Living under an assumed name, she won't show her face in England again. Vivian paused. "Does it bother you that she got away?" "No. She's already lost everything that mattered to her. Status, connections, security. That's punishment enough." Elara took a sip of champagne. "And I have more important things to focus on than revenge." "Speaking of which," Vivian pulled out a folded letter. "This arrived for you this afternoon. From Parliament." Elara scanned it quickly, her eyes widening. "They want me to testify before the Agricultural Reform Committee, to present Ravencross as a model for modernizing England's estates. You're surprised? Half the lords in Parliament have estates hemorrhaging money. You've proven there's a better way. They'd be fools not to listen." "But I'm a woman. They don't let women testify before parliamentary committees." "They do when the king personally requests it." Vivian's smile was sharp. "Welcome to having actual power, Elara. It's terrifying and addictive in equal measure." Before Elara could respond, Adrian appeared through the crowd, looking devastating in formal evening wear. His presence still made her breath catch, not from fear, as it had in the beginning, but from something entirely different. Want. They'd been married for nearly 7 months now, but their relationship had only truly begun 3 months ago in Yorkshire. Since returning to London 2 weeks prior, they'd been navigating this new dynamic. Partners in public, lovers in private, still learning each other's edges and depths. "Ladies," Adrian said, bowing slightly to them both. "Elara, there's someone who wants to meet you." He gestured toward the far side of the ballroom where an elderly woman sat enthroned in a high-backed chair, dressed in black silk with diamonds glittering at her throat. People gave her a wide berth, speaking in hushed tones. "The Dowager Duchess of Thornwood," Vivian breathed. "She's the most influential woman in England. If she acknowledges you publicly, then every door in society opens," Adrian finished. "She asked for you specifically." Elara's heart hammered, but she kept her expression serene. "Then I suppose I shouldn't keep her waiting." They crossed the ballroom together, the crowd parting before them. The Dowager watched their approach with sharp, assessing eyes that missed nothing. "Your Grace," Elara said, curtsying. "It's an honor." "Is it?" The Dowager's voice was crisp, aristocratic. "I'm not sure most people find being summoned by an old woman particularly honorable. Sit, both of you." They sat in the chairs positioned across from her. The Dowager studied Elara for a long, uncomfortable moment. Then she said, "I knew your husband, the late Lord Whitcombe. Dreadful man, violent, stupid, and mean-spirited. I told his father not to arrange the marriage, that the boy would destroy whomever he wed. But no one listens to old women, even when we're right." Elara's throat tightened. "Your Grace, Let me finish." The Dowager raised one jeweled hand. "I also knew his father, his grandfather, the whole wretched line. Generations of men who treated women as property and estates as toys to be gambled away. When Edmund died, I was not surprised. When you were accused of his murder, I was not shocked. When you married Vale here," she gestured at Adrian, "I thought you were either brilliant or desperate." "Both, probably," Adrian murmured. The Dowager's lips twitched. "Quite. But then you did something extraordinary. You didn't just defend yourself, you transformed. You took a dying estate and made it prosper. You proved that a woman with intelligence and determination could succeed where generations of men had failed." She leaned forward, her gaze intense. "Do you understand what that means, child?" No, Your Grace, I'm not sure I do." "It means you've changed the conversation. Every woman in England who's been told she's too weak, too emotional, too feminine to manage property or business, they all have you as evidence now. You've opened a door that men have been trying to keep locked for centuries." The weight of that settled over Elara like a mantle. She'd been so focused on saving Ravencross, on surviving the accusations and rebuilding from the ashes, that she hadn't considered the broader implications. "I didn't set out to change anything," she said quietly. "I just wanted to survive. The best revolutions start that way. One woman refusing to accept the role assigned to her." The Dowager reached out, patting Elara's hand with surprising gentleness. "I'm 83 years old. I've spent my entire life watching brilliant women diminish themselves to fit into the spaces men allow them. Watching their talents wasted, their potential crushed. You didn't diminish yourself. And that, my dear, is why you terrify half the people in this room and inspire the other half." "Which half are you in, Your Grace?" Adrian asked. "I'm in the half that thinks it's about damn time." The Dowager sat back, her expression becoming businesslike. "Now then, I have a proposition. I control 7 estates across England, all of them struggling, all managed by incompetent, distant relatives who care more about hunting and gambling than productivity. I want you to reform them. Use Ravencross as the model. Train managers, implement your methods, transform them the way you transformed your own property." Elara's mind reeled. 7 estates? That's an enormous undertaking. "Yes, which is why I'm offering you 20% of the increased revenue from each property, plus full authority over operational decisions. You'll have resources, staff, whatever you need. In return, you prove that what you did at Ravencross wasn't a fluke. And if I fail, then we've lost nothing but time. The estates are failing anyway." The Dowager's eyes glittered. "But you won't fail. You're too stubborn for that." Elara looked at Adrian, who nodded almost imperceptibly. This was her decision. She turned back to the Dowager. "I accept, on one condition." "Which is?" Any women on those estates who show aptitude for management get trained alongside the men. I want the next generation to have opportunities we never did." The dowager's smile was fierce and approving. "Done. I'll have my solicitors draw up the contracts. Welcome to empire building, Duchess." The next few months were a whirlwind of activity. Elara divided her time between London, where she testified before Parliament and consulted with the Agricultural Reform Committee, and the 7 Thornwood estates, implementing reforms, training managers, watching the transformation take root. Adrian accompanied her to every estate, his business expertise complementing her agricultural knowledge. They made a formidable team, the Duke and Duchess of Vale, turning struggling properties into profitable enterprises with the efficiency that made headlines and sparked imitators across England. But it was the smaller, quieter victories that mattered most to Elara. Like the day she visited the Thornwood estate in Derbyshire and found Sarah Blackwood there, the skeptical baker from Ravencross Village who'd questioned everything Elara did. Sarah had traveled 200 miles to see if the rumors were true, if the Duchess was really transforming estates all across England. "I wanted to apologize," Sarah said, twisting her apron in work-worn hands. "I didn't believe you. Thought you were just another rich woman playing at charity. But my sister lives near here, and she says you've changed everything. The tenant farmers who were starving 6 months ago are prospering now. That women are being trained in trades instead of just being told to marry and breed." "You don't owe me an apology," Elara said. "You had every reason to be skeptical. I'd never proven myself before." "No, but you've proven yourself now." Sarah looked at her directly. "And I wanted to say, what you're doing matters. Not just for the estates, but for all of us. You're showing people what's possible." After Sarah left, Elara stood in the estate office, one of 7 now, all modeled after Ravencross, and let herself feel it. The impact, the change, the knowledge that she'd turned her own survival into something larger than herself. Adrian found her there, staring out the window at the Derbyshire hills. "Good meeting?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Sarah Blackwood apologized to me." "The baker who thought you were cursed?" "The same." Elara leaned back against him, savoring his warmth. "She came all this way just to tell me I was right." "You were right. About everything." Adrian pressed a kiss to her temple. "Though I have to admit, when I first proposed this arrangement, I never imagined it would lead to parliamentary reform and a network of model estates across England." "Neither did I. I thought I'd be lucky to save Ravencross and avoid prison. And now?" Elara turned in his arms, looking up at him. "Now I think we might actually change things. Really change them. Make it so the next woman in my position doesn't have to fight this hard just to survive." "That's the plan." Adrian's expression grew more serious. "Though there's something we need to discuss. The king has asked me to consider a position as Chancellor of the Exchequer. It would mean more time in London, less freedom to travel to the estates." Elara's heart sank. "You want to accept." "I want to serve, but not at the cost of what we've built." He cupped her face in his hands. "I told him I'd consider it only if you're appointed as the official royal advisor on agricultural reform. Full title, full authority, full salary. You'd be the first woman to hold such a position." "Adrian, I'm serious. They need you more than they need me. The reforms we've implemented, they're working. England's food production has increased 8% in the last 6 months. Estate revenues are up across the board. Tenant satisfaction is the highest it's been in decades. That's your work, Elara, your vision, and it deserves official recognition. The Lords will never accept a woman in such a role." "The king already has. I have his letter in my study." Adrian's smile was pure triumph. "He's announcing it next week, along with my appointment. We'll be the first husband and wife team in the royal cabinet." Elara felt tears prick her eyes. "You didn't have to do this." "Yes, I did. Because you're the most brilliant person I've ever met, and I'll be damned if I let anyone, including you, diminish that." He kissed her then, slow and deep and full of promise. "We're partners, Elara, in everything." That was always the deal. The official announcement came on a cold December morning in the throne room at Westminster Palace. Elara stood beside Adrian, both of them in formal court dress, as the king himself read the proclamation establishing the new positions. The assembled lords and ladies erupted in shocked murmurs. Some approving, many scandalized, all unable to ignore the reality of what was happening. A woman, in the royal cabinet, with actual power. After the ceremony, Elara was immediately surrounded by a mix of congratulations and thinly veiled hostility. But she weathered it with the same composed grace that had carried her through everything else, answering questions about her plans with confidence born of hard-won experience. Later, in the carriage ride back to Grosvenor Square, Adrian watched her with undisguised admiration. "You know, this is just the beginning," he said. "Every decision you make will be scrutinized. Every failure will be used as evidence that women can't handle such responsibility. Every success will be dismissed as luck or attributed to my influence." "I know." Elara's jaw set. "Let them try. I've survived worse than professional skepticism." "Yes, you have." Adrian took her hand. "You survived Edmund. You survived the accusations. You survived the fire and Charles's betrayal and society's judgment. You've already won the hard battles, Elara. Everything else is just logistics." She squeezed his hand, warmth flooding through her. "When did you become so optimistic?" "When I married you." His expression softened. "You make me believe impossible things are possible." "Like women in government?" "Like partnerships built on something more than power and convenience." He leaned closer. "Like love." The word hung in the air between them, the first time either had said it aloud, though it had been building for months. Elara felt her breath catch. "Adrian, you don't have to say it back. I just wanted you to know." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I love you. Not the Duchess. Not the brilliant estate manager. Not the woman who's changing England. You. The woman who pushed her husband down the stairs because she chose survival over submission. The woman who walked into my office and negotiated a marriage contract like a business merger. The woman who rebuilds instead of surrendering." Tears spilled down Elara's cheeks, the first real tears she'd shed since Edmund's death. Tears of release and relief and something dangerously close to joy. "I love you too," she whispered. "I didn't think I could. Didn't think I had that left in me. But I do." They kissed in the carriage as it rattled through London's streets, and Elara felt the last pieces of her old self. The terrified girl who'd married Edmund, the broken woman who'd fled Ravencross, the desperate widow who'd agreed to a stranger's proposal, finally fall away. In their place was someone new, someone forged in fire and hardened by survival. Someone who'd learned that strength wasn't about never falling. It was about getting back up and rebuilding from the ashes. Someone who could change the world. 1 year later, Elara stood on the terrace at Ravencross, watching the sunset paint the Yorkshire hills in shades of amber and rose. The estate stretched below her, prosperous, thriving, transformed beyond recognition from the failing property she'd fought so hard to save. The new east wing gleamed in the fading light, its windows bright with lamplight as managers worked late on the latest crop reports. The textile mill's chimney puffed steady smoke, its looms producing fabric that now clothed half of London's aristocracy. The coal mine's productivity had tripled, providing employment for 300 workers, and the reforested woodlands had begun to mature, their green canopy visible from miles away. But more than that, the village had grown. New houses lined the valley road. The school Elara had established now educated 200 children, teaching them reading, mathematics, and practical trades. The bakery had expanded. The inn had added 2 new wings to accommodate the steady stream of visitors who came to study Ravencross's methods. And everywhere, in the fields, the workshops, the estate offices, women worked alongside men, managing and creating and building futures that previous generations could never have imagined. "You're brooding again," Adrian said, joining her on the terrace. He'd been in London for the past week, managing parliamentary business, but he'd returned tonight as he always did when important things were happening. "I'm reflecting," Elara corrected. "There's a difference." "Is there?" "Because you have that same expression you get when you're planning someone's overthrow." She laughed despite herself. "No overthrows planned, just thinking about how different everything is from a year ago, from 2 years ago, from when you were married to Edmund and thought your life was over?" "Yes." Elara turned to face him. "I was so certain back then that survival was the best I could hope for. that keeping my head down and enduring was the only path forward. I never imagined I'd be here, that we'd be here. Adrian pulled her close, his arms solid around her. You know what I think? I think you always had this in you. The strength, the vision, the ability to transform everything you touch. Edmund just tried to bury it. And when he couldn't, when you finally fought back, he lost everything. I killed him, Adrian. She said it plainly, without shame or regret. I stood at the top of those stairs and I pushed him, knowing exactly what would happen. I know, and I don't care. His gray eyes held hers steadily. You did what you had to do to survive. And because you survived, you've changed hundreds of lives. Thousands, probably, when you count everyone touched by the estate reforms. So no, I don't think you should feel guilty. I think you should feel proud. Before Elara could respond, Mrs. Rothwell appeared at the terrace door, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes twinkling. My lady, your grace, forgive the interruption, but your guests are arriving. Already? Elara glanced at the darkening sky. I thought we had another hour. They're early, eager to see the new improvements, I suspect. The guests were representatives from 12 estates across England, lords, stewards, and several intrepid ladies who'd convinced their families to let them study Ravencross's methods. They'd come for a week-long symposium on modern estate management, the third such gathering Elara had hosted. But this one was different, because this time, the attendees included members of Parliament who were drafting legislation to incentivize agricultural reform across the entire country. Legislation that Elara had helped write. The evening reception was held in the new ballroom, a practical space that doubled as a meeting hall and lecture theater. As Elara moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and answering questions about crop yields and management structures, she caught fragments of conversation that would have been impossible 2 years ago. The Duchess's methods increased our revenue by 40%, trained 6 women as assistant stewards, and they're outperforming the men. Parliament's considering her proposal for tenant education programs. First woman in history to advise the king on economic policy. It was surreal, intoxicating, terrifying, and absolutely real. Later, after the formal reception ended and most guests had retired to their rooms, a smaller group gathered in Elara's study, the core team that had worked alongside her for the past year. Vivian Cross was there, of course, along with Dr. Harwick, Mrs. Rothwell, Morrison, and several of the women Elara had trained as estate managers. To the Duchess, Vivian said, raising her glass, who proved that the best revenge is massive success. To partnership, Adrian countered, his eyes on Elara, and to never accepting that impossible means permanent. They drank, and then Vivian pulled out a leather folder. I have news. The consortium wants to expand again. They're proposing we establish an investment fund specifically for women-owned businesses and estates, with you as the managing director. Vivian, I'm already managing 7 estates and advising Parliament, which is exactly why you're qualified. Vivian's expression was fierce. Do you know how many brilliant women are trapped in situations like you were? Capable, intelligent, desperate for opportunity, but blocked at every turn because they're not men? This fund could change that. Give them capital, give them leverage, give them a chance. Elara looked around the room, at the faces of people who'd believed in her when she was still learning to believe in herself. How much capital are we talking about? £100,000 to start. More if the first investments succeed. That's an enormous amount of money, and an enormous amount of potential. Vivian leaned forward. You've proven the model works. Now let's scale it. Elara felt Adrian's hand find hers under the table, offering silent support for whatever she decided. She thought about this woman she'd been 2 years ago, terrified, cornered, convinced that marriage to a stranger was her only escape. She thought about standing in the ruins of Ravencross, watching her home burn, and choosing to fight instead of surrender. She thought about every woman she'd met in the past year who'd whispered that she'd given them hope, given them proof that survival was possible. I'll do it, she said, on one condition. The fund prioritizes women escaping abusive situations. Women who need more than money, they need a way out. Vivian's smile was brilliant. Done! I'll draft the terms tomorrow. The meeting continued late into the night, planning and strategizing and building something that felt larger than any of them individually. When it finally ended and the others dispersed to their rooms, Elara and Adrian remained in the study, watching the fire burn down to embers. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I'd said yes that night?" Elara asked quietly. "If I'd accepted your invitation to dance at the Ashford ball?" Adrian considered. "We probably would have had a pleasant conversation. I would have pursued you in the conventional way, and you would have married me to escape Charles. But it would have taken longer, been messier, and I don't think we would have built this." He gestured around, encompassing not just the room, but everything they'd created together. "Because I needed to challenge you first. Because we both needed to prove we could fight before we could trust each other enough to build something real." He pulled her close, tucking her against his side. "I'm glad you said no, Elara. I'm glad you made me work for this. Even though it nearly destroyed both our reputations. Especially because of that. The easy path would have given us a marriage. The hard path gave us a partnership." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fire. Then Elara said, "I'm pregnant." Adrian went completely still. "What?" "2 months. I wasn't sure for the first few weeks, and then I wanted to wait until after the symposium to tell you." She turned to look at him, nervous despite everything they'd been through together. "I know we said we'd wait, but Elara." Adrian cupped her face in his hands, his expression awed. Are you happy about it?" "Terrified," she admitted. "But yes, happy. Are you?" He broke off, laughing shakily. "I'm absolutely terrified too, and thrilled, and already worrying about every possible complication, which probably means we're going to be excellent parents. Or completely disaster at it. Possibly both." He kissed her gently. "We'll figure it out, together. The way we figured out everything else." Elara leaned into him, feeling the truth of it settle in her bones. They would figure it out, because that's what they did. They faced impossible situations and found ways through them, building something stronger on the other side. 8 months later, on a bright spring morning, Elara gave birth to a daughter. They named her Eleanor after Elara's mother, and from the moment she drew her first breath, it was clear she'd inherited her parents' stubbornness and fire. Elara held her daughter in the master bedroom at Ravencross, the same room where she'd once hidden from Edmund's rages, and marveled at how completely her world had transformed. This room that had been a prison was now a sanctuary. This estate that had nearly destroyed her was now thriving, and the life she'd thought was over had become something more extraordinary than she'd ever imagined possible. Adrian sat beside her on the bed, one arm around her shoulders, the other hand gently stroking Eleanor's downy head. "She's perfect," he whispered. "She's going to be difficult," Elara corrected. "Look at her. She's already glaring at us." "Good. The world needs more difficult women." Adrian pressed a kiss to Elara's temple. "Women who refuse to accept the roles assigned to them. Women who rebuild from ashes and change the rules instead of accepting them. Women like her mother. Exactly like her mother." 3 days later, when Elara was strong enough to receive visitors, Mrs. Rothwell brought news from London. Parliament had passed the Agricultural Reform Act, legislation based almost entirely on Elara's recommendations. Every estate in England would be required to implement basic tenant protections, education programs, and sustainable farming practices. And the Thornwood Investment Fund had received applications from over 300 women seeking capital to escape bad situations and start new ventures. "You've changed England," Mrs. Rothwell said, her eyes bright with tears. "Really, truly changed it." But Elara knew the truth. She hadn't changed England alone. She'd survived, and in surviving, she'd shown others that survival was possible, that you could push back against the forces trying to destroy you and emerge not just intact, but transformed. That evening, Elara stood on the terrace with Eleanor in her arms, showing her daughter the estate that would one day be hers. The sun was setting, painting everything in gold, and below them Ravencross hummed with life and purpose. "This is yours," Elara whispered to the sleeping baby. "Not because you're a daughter instead of a son. Not because some man decides to grant it to you, but because it's your birthright, your grandmother's legacy, your mother's triumph, and you'll never have to fight the way I did to keep it." Adrian joined them, wrapping his arms around them both. "She'll have her own battles," he said quietly. "Different ones, probably, but she'll have something you didn't." "What's that?" "A mother who taught her that survival isn't enough. That you can demand more than that. You can demand triumph. Elara looked out at Ravencross, at the estate she'd saved, the lives she'd changed, the future she'd built from the ashes of her own destruction. She thought about the woman she'd been, the terrified girl who'd married Edmund, the desperate widow who'd agreed to marry Adrian, the duchess who'd stood in a magistrate's office and refused to be broken. All of those women lived in her still, all of their battles, their scars, their hard-won victories. But she was also someone new, someone who'd learned that the most dangerous thing a woman could do was refuse to disappear when the world tried to erase her. Someone who'd chosen to fight back and win. "Tell me again, Ig," Eleanor would say years later when she was old enough to understand. "Tell me the story of how you became the Duchess who changed everything." And Elara would smile, holding her daughter close, and say, "It starts with a woman who walked into a storm, and instead of being swept away, she learned to command the lightning." But that night, standing on the terrace with her husband and newborn daughter, Elara simply held them close and watched the sun set over the empire she'd built. The countess who'd refused to kneel had become a duchess who'd taught England to bow. And her story, their story, was just beginning.